When the central bank bombing went off, my dad was just down the road. My brother's friends from his office got glass in their eye because the windows shattered. So we were like, peace at any cost. I was one of those guys.
You've had a very successful career in banking and finance. And then you came back to Sri Lanka. You're a political commentator. You're an advisor to Sri Lanka's main opposition party. What on earth were you thinking?
And then, around 4 years ago, Mr. Premadasa asked me to join the working committee of the SJB. Most people aren't aware, for example, that Indira Gandhi made plans to invade Sri Lanka when the North and East and South started having issues. The nationalist base was like, they're going to take over Sri Lanka with this $500 million. Once we take this, we'll have to give them all our deeds to our land. Sri Lankan government lost 900 billion rupees of tax revenue, corporate tax revenue in 18 months after the collapse. The mandate is for AKD. So AKD, that's why AKD rocks up in parliament every time some controversial thing happens. He comes as finance minister, makes a speech in parliament and goes. But if you're in a low margin sector, how the hell are you buying a Rolls Royce in a country where 17,000 is the poverty line? The rupee is going to keep depreciating against the dollar. Right? It depreciated last year about 5-6%. This year it will do the same. You say what you want about Gotabaya. The man wrote a manifesto.
And he went for it.
Implemented every single thing, even while the country is crashing. His family is under threat. He's like, no, I'm not. Tax cut, right? So, accountability, where is it?
Mr. Kusum, welcome to From the Island.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Mr. Kusum is fine, but Kusum is also probably better.
Kusum it is. So, just to start, I know that you've had a very successful career in banking and finance. You've done that for over a decade. And then, from what I understand, you came back to Sri Lanka. You're a political commentator. You're an advisor to Sri Lanka's main opposition party. What on earth were you thinking?
It's a bit of a roundabout way. Okay, so a quick background. My father was a banker, 55 years in banking. My brothers both bankers, so I also ended up in banking, something I didn't really want to do. When I was applying to universities, I was saying, let's do anything but something finance related. But then I remember my brother at the time said, if you do accounting and finance, it'll open up avenues for you. You don't have to do banking, you can do other things. And I believed him. So I did accounting and finance. And then after I finished, he had moved to Dubai, where I was born in Dubai. And he said, this place is growing. Do you want to come and get a job here? And I said, what kind of industry? He was like, well, the banking industry is doing good. So I thought, okay, well, this looks like it's going to be banking then, and finance. Everyone's like, go try for a bank. Because it makes sense, right? To optimize your earnings, that's the sector you would go to, finance, sure. Right? So I ended up in Dubai working for a local Abu Dhabi-based bank, but it was based in Dubai city center. I worked there for 1.5 years. It was really interesting. I was basically entry-level job, but just, the society, working with different nationalities like Indians, Pakistanis, Filipinos, you get all these cultural little things, So that was really interesting, but I got very kind of fed up with the life in India. The money was great, but then you just ended up blowing most of it. On the weekend, you'd go out somewhere, you'd go to a mall. Everywhere you go, there's a mall in Dubai, right? And this is more so now, but even in 2007, 2008, when I was there, just malls everywhere. You just end up spending all your money. So I was just telling my parents, I'm kind of lonely, kind of bored here. And I'm spending all my money. Y'all said you can go to Dubai and save. This is not going to happen. So I'd like to come back. So they were like, yeah, okay, come back. So then came back, got into the FCC Bank, and I really enjoyed working there. So I was there for 10 years, working in corporate finance, learned a lot. But honestly, 3-4 years into it, I realized I can't do, because I watched my brothers do 30 years, 25 years in banking. My father did 55 years in banking. I just looked at it and I can't do this for another 30 years. So and my father at the time, and my mom was convinced me to do SEMA. I don't know if you know SEMA, so the managed accountancy. So I was like, oh God, more accountancy. So I just said, I looked around, and one of my friends at the bank was doing a master's at Columbia Uni in international relations. And he was saying it's really fun, you learn a lot of interesting things that we've never heard of. And I'm like, oh, okay, this sounds good. So I applied for that, and I actually, for the first time in my life, found something that I like studying. Right. I've never been like a bookish kind of person. Okay. I read to pass the exam, basically. Right. Even uni was like that. You do what you can, make sure you get a decent enough pass mark that your parents don't get too pissed off and that kind of thing. But when I got into exactly, just finished it. Yeah, exactly. But when it came to the last, the bits of this international relations course, I just kind of realized that I really enjoyed the intersection between politics and philosophy. Like philosophy in international relations, and I started learning more about economics and philosophy as well. So this is the other thing when I went to university, but everyone I spoke to, British kids, from other countries, they were doing this thing called PPE, which was politics, philosophy, and economics, which is apparently, I didn't realize at the time, it was the most popular degree program in the whole of the UK. And actually, if you look at most of the MPs, most of the people in finance, they all started with a degree in PPE.
Right.
It was like a random thing that everyone was doing, and I never understood the link. I'm like, that's a very random thing, like philosophy, politics, economics, what do these things have to do with each other kind of thing? Because I was in finance brain.
Yeah.
So when you're in finance brain, you don't think of philosophy.
Right.
And
It's
politics
too
is politics is not something you take seriously.
Yeah.
Economics, okay. So PPE, later on I realized, okay, this intersection between philosophy and economics and philosophy and foreign policy is actually really, really interesting. And from there, when I had the chance to we had a couple of family enterprises in travel, like travel trade businesses. So those were kind of picking up. So I decided to leave banking and take up that while pursuing. So I started doing more writing, more reading. I started interviewing people, like my lecturers, some of their colleagues, past lecturers, just to get a better understanding of foreign relations and international relations and that kind of thing. I even applied for a PhD and got into the program and did the first 6 months, but I ran into a technical problem with my research because I was doing a research into political radicalization to violent extremism related to the Easter bombings. So that required a study of Islamism and the fundamentalist form of Islamism.
Yeah.
That would have required interviews with clerics, imams, that kind of thing, going east. Language barrier, it was going to create an ethical issue for me because I had to be a translator, and whether they'd be honest about how they answer. So I was running into a lot of technical issues with the interview, so I had to abandon that PhD. I haven't abandoned the PhD thing altogether. But yeah, so in the midst of all this, I ran into an academic who basically introduced me to someone in the media, and they asked me to come on TV a few times. And then someone else recommended me to Mr. Sajith Premadasa in 2019. So I did a few papers for him for his manifesto for the presidential election at the time. And I worked on that campaign and got to know a few of the other MPs just from working on their campaign. And then, around 4 years ago, Mr. Premadasa asked me to join the working committee of the SJB. And I was already in advice on foreign policy. So then last year, or was it the year before? Might have been the year before, he made me advisor to the leader of the opposition. So through the opposition leader's office on political economy. So that's kind of a long story, but that's where I ended up here on this podcast with you guys. So
Was that all taking place as you were still a corporate, or had you?
So I left the banking sector in 2017, and we ran our own businesses for another 4 years. So so basically between 2018 to today, there was a bit of an overlap between our family businesses and what I was doing here. But now I'm just doing this full time.
You decided I'm done with this finance. I want something.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it's an opportunity to learn stuff,
Fair.
And getting lucky and being linked to the SJB helps open doors when it comes to meetings with people. You get to go abroad and meet dignitaries, and being in the room in some context is interesting. Like you get to learn a lot, because if you're interested in politics, if not, you'd be really bored. But if you're someone who's had any interest in politics and economics, you would generally find these rooms very interesting. Just even the personality plays, how people react to each other, the hierarchies that automatically you see in a room when you go into it. That stuff that I find it really, really interesting.
Why the SJB though?
So basically, I'm a Colombo boy, Colombo liberal, westernized upbringing. Not a westernized upbringing, but I grew up westernized. My parents are not westernized at all. They're very, Sri Lankan, Sinhalese, Buddhist, all that. But I just had a westernized upbringing. I can't really explain it any better than that. I was born in Dubai, but lived there only like 4 or 5 years, and then moved back to Sri Lanka. But I guess this is when we started having English TV. So I remember a time when we only had 4 channels.
Right.
And MTV was one of them, and MTV was the one that had English programming, so you'd get sitcoms and Thundercats and like cartoons and stuff. So from there, it was just, then MTV started in the 90s, and then music, and then movies, and then we had I remember one of the first movies I saw in cinema was Speed with Keanu Reeves. So these, like the Hollywood kind of thing, and you just get into that like westernized
And you
sort
were
of
very
culture.
young, I assume. You were very young at this
Yeah,
point.
4 or 5 years
Makes
old
sense.
basically. So
Makes sense.
yeah.
Well, so considering, well, before this started, I was just telling Inosh, I was like, I wonder why Kusum decided to enter the cesspit that is Sri Lankan politics.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he doesn't seem like the type who would really enjoy what goes on.
That's
you
the
know?
thing, because I'm not in politics. That's that.
Makes
I'm
sense.
basically in the
As
advisory,
an
back
advisory.
office kind of thing. But I am front office as well for media work for the party. I represent the party in the media on like Sirius TV, news for Face the Nation and stuff. But other than that, I'm pretty much a back office guy. I've never been retail politics, as you can probably tell. If I had to speak to a group in Sinhalese,
Yeah,
it
sure.
doesn't go very well. And most people look at me. I would not be someone you'd vote for. I'd be like, who is this guy? Where is he from? That kind of thing. It's a bit. I'm an atheist. English speaking, extremely liberal. So not your son of the soil kind of guy.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you're surviving the political world, to be honest. But
No,
I
to be honest,
understand.
it's a lot different than people think. So the people that I interacted in the SJB and its leadership are all, fairly liberal. They've got a worldview that's not dissimilar to mine because they're all UNPs, right? So I'm a UNP voter. As I said, I'm Colombo liberal. Grew up voting for Ranil Wickremesinghe. I've voted for him every single time I've had the opportunity to. Been a UNP voter. I've never voted SLFP, never voted SLPP, never voted left of centre. Good or bad, I mean, the UNP is a disaster right now. I have to tell you, it was the best choice at the time, in my opinion. I still stand by that choice. I don't know if people will say differently. And it is difficult, right? Because if you think about it, growing up as a UNP, I was always like, there was a time when I was very young, I remember having an argument. I must have been about 12 or 13 years old because one of my cousins said, we should just give Jaffna to the LTT because it's already a de facto, LTT control. It's already a de facto separate state. That was his argument.
Right.
And I actually thought, you know what? If you can stop the bombings, because we were in Colombo, my father worked in Fort. My brother worked in Fort in the banking sector. So when the central bank bombing went off, my dad was just down the road. My brother's friends from his office got glass in their eye because the windows at ANZ Greenlace had shattered. So this stuff was kind of really visceral to us. We felt it. So we were like, peace at any cost. I was one of those guys, if you can call it appeasement, you can call it whatever, capitulation to the LTT, whatever you want, but we just want bombs to stop going off. Obviously, this was never a serious thing, like no way that Jaffna was ever on offer, or the LTT were never going to say, okay, just give us Jaffna. It was just a conversation that we had.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking about this later on and realizing that, well, were we right to think that way? Because end of the day, most people would argue that the ends justify the means in terms of the war, in terms of now the war's finished. There's no more killing like there was. There's no more suicide bombings. The price you pay is the whatever 10,000 to 40,000, whatever number had to die for this apparently. So this is kind of the trade-off that we're all living through in Sri Lanka. So every year when there's a Human Rights Council meeting, every year when there's a Remembrance Day, the War Remembrance Day, the LTT Memorial Days, this is stuff that comes up, right? But I can't look back with hindsight and say, oh no, I should have supported the war more stringently. No, I actually at the time I said, if we can win a few battles and then get them to a negotiation, like when the tsunami happened. So great, everyone was like, it's great, let's all get together. But I guess growing up in Colombo much, we just kind of misunderstand the nationalist sentiment. Like a lot of people outside Colombo will look at our leaders sitting down with Prabhakaran and the rest of the LTT leadership, and they know people who died at the hands of the LTT, like their friends, neighbors, their villagers.
Right.
They're not going to see this the same way that you and I see it, or that I saw it. So understanding that took a little time, because I just thought everyone would just want no war. I thought that would be just the given, but that's not as easy as that, right? For a lot of people, because if you surrender some territory, what did those people die for? That's a very valid. You can never dilute that argument when someone says, when Namal Rajapaksa talks about war heroes and sacrifices made during the war, we understand it as propaganda. We see what he's doing, but to a lot of other people, there's a lot of truth to it, and absolutely, there is some truth to it.
Absolutely.
Right? So.
Well, that's interesting because you're suggesting that you were very idealistic at the time and you just wanted the bombs to stop, which most people want the killing to stop. But I've read your writings and you invoke Mearsheimer a lot, you invoke Chomsky. So that kind of tells me you are a very realist thinker, very structural, analytical. I'm curious as to, because you dig deep into foreign policy and you advise on political economy, what's your take on Sri Lanka's current geopolitical position, and what's your view of the current government's foreign policy?
Okay. So, if I can just, for the benefit of your audience, just start at the beginning of international relations, right? International relations is about the relationships between states, nation states, okay? So one of the first things you learn in international relations is that nation states exist in a system of anarchy, in that there is no system. Now, we understand anarchy to mean chaos, but anarchy is not, that's not strictly what anarchy means. Anarchy means a lack of a hierarchy, a lack of a supreme authority. Like there is like something, if we lived in anarchy, there is no policeman for me to go and complain to. There is no higher power. It's just you and me. That's kind of what anarchy means. So technically speaking, with sovereignty, with the concepts of sovereignty, national boundaries, nation states exist in this, according to international relations theory, this state of anarchy, where there is nobody to appeal to, a higher power to appeal to. Now the
Not the United Nations?
well, or the Board of Peace now. You have updated to the Board of Peace.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's the thing. So exactly right. So, but in reality, what we kind of understand and what the world even now explicitly moving towards is these spheres of influence, right? Whereas a country exists in a certain physical space, like Sri Lanka exists at the southern edge of India. There's nothing we can do about that. There's nothing we can change about that, right? So that sphere of influence determines how we act, because we automatically know who Big Brother is in this region, right? And this Big Brother India is more important than Big Brother in the United States or Big Brother in China. Why? Because they're closer to us, right? Anybody that wants to attack us. Because I know that nowadays foreign policy and international relations is looked upon from trade, investment, economics. But that's not the basis for international relations. International relations and realism, for instance, Mearsheimer's realism is primarily concerned with national security and the existential threats that your nation state will face, right? So in that sense, we exist in India's sphere of influence. This is not necessarily a controversial statement, right? Even the JVP at its outset was a reaction to what they felt was Indian imperialism. But even in that, they accept that we are in a sphere of influence, because it's just a reality. Like India is just a hegemonic power in this region, and we are part of their southern security calculus. Like when India thinks about its 4 borders, the southern border, we are part of that security calculation. And that's been part of the reason why we are where we are. The war, for instance, it's not controversial to say, for instance, that the 13th Amendment, the provincial council system, all of this is an Indian insertion into Sri Lanka's constitution. This was done under some duress, and that this is something that a lot of Sri Lankans, especially in the villages, they are taught. It's part of the culture. Like India did try to dominate us. Now maybe that sentiment has diluted, but there is a conversation to be had about this, and it's a real thing, because most people aren't aware, for example, that Indira Gandhi made plans to invade Sri Lanka when when the north and the east and the south started having issues. I think it may have been after the first set of pogroms, where Indira Gandhi and the RAW, they got together and they hatched a plan to take over select runways, airstrips in Sri Lanka, fly in paratroopers, and start taking over certain areas. This never came to...
Sorry, because by RAW you mean RAW,
RAW,
Indian intelligence?
the Indian intelligence. And so Indira Gandhi died, she was assassinated, so that plan never worked out. But this was how far it had gone. And then later on, for instance, the LTTE were trained not just in the south of India, but in major RAW bases around India, in the north, Chakravarti, all of these places, right? So, and then we know, for instance, that the south of India was essentially an area that was very friendly to LTTE activity, training camps, ideology, all that. So when you take all of this together, India and Sri Lanka have had a contradiction and a contest, right? So India's, for example, language issue, before it came here, it was there in India, where the South rebelled against Gandhi. Gandhi had a project to make Hindi a link language. Now, that's how they framed it, but a lot of people will look at it as language domination, because that's why the Tamil people of the South, the southern states, marched against it, because they were like, this is language domination. That same strain of language, linguistic nationalism found its way to Sri Lanka and this WRD, right? So this kind of, this informs part of our like history and our foreign relations. So our foreign relations, the first thing we have to do is deal with India, and our dealings with India is painted by our history with, Tamil nationalism, the LTTE, and now with Chinese expansion, right? So since the post-war period, and I talked about this on an interview recently, what we've seen is a steady shift, a pivot away from India, which the Mahinda Rajapaksa government did very intentionally, because they saw that during the war, they almost brought the UNHRC tried to bring sanctions against Sri Lanka. Right at the end of the war, so we defeated a UNHRC resolution. Not defeated, we actually got it. Actually, in the post-war period, just after the war, if you read the UNHRC resolution, they commended the Sri Lankan government. They welcomed the end of the LTTE, the end of hostility. So it was very different wording to what happened later on, because we made certain commitments to the international community. We just didn't even try to keep them. And why didn't we feel that pressure? India would have put pressure on us. But then Mahinda Rajapaksa brought in China and said, we have an alternative development partner. So now so now what? Now you have to be more overt in how you pressure us.
Well, and wasn't India anyway at a point where it was too weak to?
You would say weak, but Sri Lanka is such a small market, and India is such a big country that you could easily have funneled in money. I don't think money was a problem. It's just, they just were asleep. I think Indian foreign policy was sleeping for a while until the likes of Jaishankar came in and sort of took an actual stance on what was going on. Because if you told any Indian politician in the 80s, 90s, 70s that China would have this kind of footprint in Sri Lanka, a footprint that includes, I'm not like an anti-China guy or anything like that, right? But I'm just telling you the facts, right? For all of the commentary on Western domination, IMF domination, Indian domination, there's only one country that has a 1990 lease on a port that built an artificial island as FDI just off the coast of a regional rival, India. There's only one country that's by far and away the largest creditor, single largest creditor to Sri Lanka. Okay, so I think when people say, oh, Chinese investment is benign, US investment is imperialistic, these are clearly not the case, right? Because and understand, if the US wanted, I don't know if you remember the Millennium Corporation grant. It was like $500 million, and the nationalist base was like, they're going to take over Sri Lanka with this $500 million. Once we take this, we'll have to give them all our deeds to our lands, and because that was part of the thing, was they were going to build a digital land registry to make it easier to allocate land efficiently, right? And there was some road project that they were going to fund slightly. They are trying to do a road in Sri Lanka. It was like this thing where, it's an imperial thing, like $500 million. Meanwhile, our major export destination is the USA. So if they wanted influence, they would do what Trump did and just put like a 2% or a 5% tariff. They don't need to spend $500 million to help a land registry to dominate Sri Lanka, right? So this is the kind of thinking that it's in the media. Like this is not me picking up on a fringe thing, but this is on, like, I saw the Professor Tissivitharan, the late Tissivitharan, passed away recently. 2 articles across 3 days in the Island and Daily News, just blasting Western imperialism, blasting the MCC. I mean, just completely ideological, just nonsense. So that kind of thing we have to avoid. And just to get to the question on our foreign policy with this government, what we see is that there are opportunities for Sri Lanka in terms of investments from India. Now, I know this from firsthand from going to India and meeting officials in India. They want physical connectivity. They want more ferry connectivity. They want grid connectivity. They want industrial zones to work with Sri Lankan companies. Now, some of this is real business. Some of it is geopolitics. They want the kind of purchase that China has in Sri Lanka, which they should rightfully have. Right? They're the ones who should have this purchase because we are in their sphere of influence. China's all the way somewhere else. Yeah. How did they get all this? How did they get all this purchase? What was India doing during that time, right? So, from that point of view, this government has sort of, I mean, ideologically, if I can just go into politics for a second, Anurukumara Dissanayake went to India during the campaign, and he visited a bunch of factories. I mean, the Amul dairy factory, and one of the things he said in the speech to, I think what was shown in the media here, was that his government is for technology transfers, but not for foreign direct investment. Like he said that we don't want investment, like in the sense there's a belief that foreign capital comes and it takes over natural resources and then they make profit out of it, right? So this is kind of the thinking that I have a bad feeling pervades this government.
Right.
Which is why, I mean, I haven't seen sophisticated capital investment into Sri Lanka in the last 2 years. Can you think of any? The only thing that came up was a $500 million Big Ben style project, which is another mixed development project in the port city.
Okay,
That was
what's that about?
advertised. It's basically a 7-star, 5-star, whatever development, resort, mall, port city. They only mentioned the name of a special investment vehicle. I think it was something like Silver Line or some random like name. No names of promoters, but that was one of the largest FDI tickets that we got, that this government has had.
Isn't the largest one the Sinopec refinery?
The Sinopec refinery, I mean the largest in the port city.
In the port city, right.
But if you take the total FDI, I think the majority of the FDI comes from port city projects.
Right.
Not FDI into Sri Lanka. But just check me on that, right? But either way, when you look at countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, no, it's not Taiwan and countries like that, they're more advanced. But let's take Vietnam, right? Vietnam was a country that roughly had a slightly lower GDP per capita adjusted for purchasing power parity in 1990. So they had about 2,000, 2,500.
In the early 90s.
In the early 90s, or 1990, let's say, we had roughly the same. But today they are about $5,000, $6,000 ahead of us in that. And they also had a war. Like their war was probably more destructive than us, even though it was shorter, right? So, but how did they get to where they are? They are now in semiconductors manufacturing, automotive manufacturing. They're doing high technology exports.
So what did they do differently? Do you feel like the president or the government is separating foreign policy from economics?
No, I think it's a different question, right? So why I mentioned the FDI thing is that I think FDI is part of the thing where this government is missing out, because there is a link between geopolitics and FDI. You can see it Adani, right? So Adani is not here just to make money, right? Adani is also an instrument of geopolitics, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So the China Harbour Engineering, CHEC, the CM Ports, the one who do Harbour the Mattala. These are not just investment vehicles, right? It's clearly for geopolitics.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So in that sense, Indian companies also want to come here. Some for business, some for geopolitics, some for both. But I'm just not seeing the volume, given the interest that I've seen. The interest is there. One Indian official mentioned Nepal and said that even though they have a few issues with Nepal, they helped fund the grid and they did the contracts for the power sharing agreement. They made them open source so that anyone can look into it, question, So you can see how they're thinking about this, right? And they said they have already planned for another reactor. So they are full on into being like, we will help you with your energy, right? So of course, from a national security point of view, you'd say maybe we shouldn't have grids connected, but from a national security point of view, you'd say maybe we don't need physical connectivity. So one Indian official mentioned Bahrain. He said Bahrain's economy runs on Saudi people coming there for the weekend, and they come on a causeway, which is a bridge, essentially a massive bridge, and they spend small amount of the GDP every weekend and then go back to Saudi. So that's one of the way they're pitching it for our tourism sector. So connect the north to the north of Sri Lanka, connect the south of India, get that. So because a ferry is good, but a road is, you can triple the number of people coming in, right?
True.
Then they're doing something called, there's an Indian transnational highway that's started and being discussed. It connects Myanmar, Thailand and India. So they were taking how Sri Lanka could very easily be part of this transnational highway if you just extend a bridge from some part of the eastern southern tip of India to Mannar or something like that. So this is the kind of thing that they're thinking about. So yes, there are security risks, but there are some investment opportunities. Like clearly, we met a group of businessmen and industrialists as part of like a think tank, and as part of like a chamber of commerce. And they were all out, like they were so interested in just coming because they see there's an opportunity here, and businesses look for cheap labor, cheap energy, good infrastructure. We don't have a lot of those things at the moment. So that's kind of where we need to get to, right? But for that, you have to prioritize investment. If you prioritize investment, other things will fall into place, and then you'll see, okay, our energy costs are amongst the highest in Asia. We're paying the highest energy costs in Asia. So why would a business come and invest here if they have to pay some of the highest energy costs? We have very strict labor laws. why are they going to? So there's all these other issues. But if you use your geopolitics, because we are in a certain position, whether we like it or not. So are we going to just play defense the whole time, or are we going to? Because 2009 to 2019, we had so much Chinese investment, right? Billions, tens of billions of US dollars. Have we used it?
Yeah.
Have we maximized it? Have we done the best we could have with that investment? Clearly not. We have an airport that doesn't have, planes. We have a port that's just recently come into full capacity. We haven't updated our Colombo port, which is one of the best in.
I mean, China is the winner in that, essentially.
China's the
they
winner
don't care
everywhere you
about
look.
the return. They don't care about the financial return of it.
Look, I know I'll come across as a bit of a China hawk. It's weird. I'm not. I actually admire the Chinese system a lot, like a hell of a lot. And it's happening in India as well, where a lot of the Chinese success in the last 10, 20 years has come from various provinces within China competing with each other.
Yeah.
Even these car companies, they come from a specific part of China and they compete with other provinces. And when you compete provincially, the chances of technology transfer, expertise transfer is much. You can literally go and spy on your competition. So that the diffusing information within a province becomes much quicker. Right, and then you fight for resources, and the state allocates resources based on who's doing the best. BYD is here because they did the best. They are not the company whose president is close to Xi Jinping. That's not how it worked in China, right? The best companies made it out of China, and now they're dominating parts of the world. They're dominating it, right? The Japanese cars cannot compete with these cars, right? So China has won in numerous ways. But if someone tries to tell me that they're completely benign in Sri Lanka, like, it's not a factual statement to make. Like, look at the port, the Hambantota port. It was funded by the Exim Bank of China. That's one of the largest financial institutions in the entire world, probably a top 5 bank. And they lent to the Sri Lankan government, and they lent to the Sri Lankan government and the Chinese company for a port that was completely unviable. And coming from the banking sector, I can tell you, like, I work in Kalutara, right? I worked in Kalutara for 3 months, and the largest loan I did was like 7 million rupees. But I also did like 100,000, 200,000 rupee facilities. I did a loan for a lady who's like 60 years old. She was just below the borrow age limit. She wanted a 3-year facility for 200,000 rupees to put up an iron rod stall to sell fruits outside the temple.
Okay.
Even for that, I had to do like a cash flow. I had to show that this is freaking viable, like, who is the borrower. I can't see how Exim Bank like approved hundreds of millions of dollars for a port in Mathura. Like, that's just, I just can't buy it. Like, there was no feasibility report. The feasibility report that we did with the Dutch company, they actually said that it would make way more sense to develop Trincomalee or the Colombo port than building a new port altogether.
From a financial perspective, right?
From a sure. I mean, you have to have some, like, yes, it's national infrastructure, but when you're taking in borrowings, you have to have a feasibility and financial viability to some point. Or you have to say, okay, we are going to fund, the government will fund this much more when that comes along. You have to plug that gap from somewhere.
Sure. Okay.
So what happened was there was no funds, basically, and there was no business. So they were like, why should we invest in this if there's no business? So why did we build it? It's bonkers. It's completely bonkers.
Actually, I do want to get into the Hambantota port in particular because it's a very fascinating thing to me. From what I understand, the Defense Forum in Asia had also explicitly classified Hambantota as one of 3 People's Liberation Army dual-use facilities. Now, I get it. If I was China, I'd do the exact same thing. It's realpolitik, right?
I don't know if it's dual use or really. Can you classify as dual use?
Well, from my understanding of this, and you can completely disagree with me, but the Chinese in their string of pearls strategy, for those who appreciate board games, they might like this analogy, but I think the United States geopolitically plays the game of risk, while China plays the game of Go. Okay. And for those who don't know Go, Go is essentially you want to surround your opponent, not for a decisive victory, but you want to surround your opponent, and if you surround them before the battle, you've already won. Whereas in risk, the United States wants to cut off the supply and gain control immediately. That's why they are very military focused. They're very naval focused to get a foothold. And China understands they can't play that game. So they come to ports, etc., etc. And the reason that I think that it may be dual purpose, not right now, is because
Oh, okay, yeah, someday, potentially. Yeah, yeah.
and that's how they think. They are 100 years ahead, you know. They have a 99-year lease. Xi Jinping's he's not going to be alive in 10, 20 years.
Yeah, that's
you know.
100%.
So their
That's a
thinking
great
is
idea. That's a great analogy.
So
Yeah.
far ahead. And when you think about the port in Myanmar,
Yes.
Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Hambantota, all three of them essentially surround India. Now, they're not dual use. However, it kind of starts with, all right, let me get this area, let me build it up commercially. Oh, then let me build some infrastructure for some submarine docking. And the next thing you know, in 30, 40 years, is dual use. But none of us will have wanted that, right? Considering all of that, what is the... And India kind of responded to that by getting management rights in the Matale Airport area as well. So where do you see this playing out for us in terms of... Do you have any advice? What would you advise SJB in terms of this game that's being played?
I mean, the thing is that it's about hedging, right? So like I said, in 2009, 2019, we had this opportunity to hedge successfully and we got money into the economy. It's just about how you use it. So again, with India, there is opportunity for investment. It's about what are you trying to invest in. Now, if you're going to do a song and a dance about a multi-development project for a mall and real estate is not the kind of investment that's productive. This is what happened between 2009 and 2019 is that we had all this GDP growth. But is GDP growth based on what?
Infrastructure.
A construction boom.
Yeah.
And construction boom is necessary. Every country has some kind of construction boom. But after that, you have to follow with productive sectors, right? You have to have things happening on this infrastructure, not just people going from Colombo to down south. Yeah. That's not the only thing.
But Kusum, it would make sense, right? Let's say the Chinese investment in Hambantota in particular. Now, if the Chinese give us $1 billion and they say, here's $1 billion, we'll build this up. But hey, part of the condition is only Chinese workers. So we're not creating jobs, we're not creating employment.
Okay.
It's coming from Chinese state bank, which essentially is just the Chinese funding themselves. So where is our return?
Can I tell you what I would say in this?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd say, okay, I'll give you all of this. Okay, but you have to bring the latest BYD factory to Sri Lanka in a 5-year period.
Right.
And in that period, you have to train 200 of our engineers.
Right.
They can go to China. If you want them to work in China for 5 years, do that. Send people abroad because they'll learn shit and come back. Right. And you can say, okay, semiconductors. We are not going to be in semiconductor manufacturing anytime in our lifetimes, right? But let's start. Yeah. Let's bring down the basic, testing kit and just, and we'll give you the land. We'll give you this small little fishing port somewhere and then you build it up. Yeah, go for it. But then, like for example, the physical connectivity. If you build a bridge between India and Sri Lanka, if there was a war, it's a really bad thing. Okay, but if there's no war, you control the visa program, you control the entry points, right? And you have a steady stream of tourism. So how you manage the security angle is up to you. But you can't say, no, security, we're just not going to do anything. You can do that, that's kind of what we're doing. But I'm saying there's an opportunity there. So I'm saying, and there's pressure, right? If you give India, I'm just saying it's a very extreme example, but if you give India land connectivity, and you say, we'll give you land connectivity to Sri Lanka, we'll give you that. What are you going to give us back in return? How about a nuclear security umbrella? How about nuclear fusion technology? How about you send your best nuclear scientists here and help us with getting nuclear energy here? Because now nuclear energy is probably, they found not that they found it, but there's a lot of promise with thorium reactors instead of uranium. So it's not, you can't produce bombs with the thorium is what I'm not an expert on that. But I'm just saying these are just ideas that you should always get something back. Instead, what we did was, we'll give you this project, you give us something under the table, and we'll shake hands on it. So and then what happened? Like people just bought 3 Range Rovers and an Aston Martin, and then that's parked in Hambantota. So this is what happened in the last 10 years, and everyone knows this. Like everyone knows this is what's happened. Like if you say luxury apartments, there's about 100 people that own all the luxury apartments in Colombo, or can own them.
100 odd people, you say?
I would say, what do you think?
Fair enough.
How many people are going to afford a 200 million rupee,
That's true.
1,000 square foot apartment? There's not that many people in Sri Lanka. I mean, okay, if you count their kids and all, there's probably a lot of people, but the people in control of the money, there's about 100, 200 people. How many people are you guys into the stock market? I'm not, but...
No, not the local,
Yeah, so
obviously.
basically, the local stock market is also like, there's probably
it's
like
disasters.
like 100 people or 50 people that can take it up or down in a day if they really wanted to.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I
The
get
SEC is not going to do anything about it. Right?
That's true. Well, that's interesting that you talk about this, because then what would the leverage of Sri Lanka really be? Let's say you go into these negotiations with these countries. My take is, if you don't have leverage, it doesn't matter the size of your state, but small states in particular, if you cannot go into a meeting with some form of leverage, like big nations don't care, you know?
But the thing is, they're here for a reason. They're here for a reason. China is here to project power in the Indian Ocean. The United States is here because this is part of their, what is it called, Asia-Pacific strategy, right? India is here because they are part of their Southern Calculus. That's why they didn't give us $4 billion in credit lines during the economic collapse just because they love us, right? It's because they know you don't want anarchy on your southern border. Like, that's just not a thing you want. We even had the Easter bombing. So then that means there's a terror cell on India's southern border, right?
Yep.
You don't want any of these things. So you need to manage. That's part of leverage. The other part of leverage is we are one of the most busiest, we are on one of the busiest sea lanes in the world, right? I saw the stats that were insane, like some 70% of all oil that goes to China or something goes through. So there's all sorts of leverage that we have. But you never say this stuff explicitly, right? You're not going to go into a meeting with the Chinese and say, you know, most of your oil comes from Pakistan, we never know something. Now, if it was someone like Trump, that's the kind of stuff that they do because they have all that power. But there are little ways you can do that. So no one can say that Lakshman Kadrigam is going to walk into a meeting with an Indian or a Chinese diplomat and feel overawed and say, oh, we'll just do anything you want, give me some money, I'll give my party. And that's because they were people who had ideas, they had substance, they had strategies, they had vision. There's nobody been like that in our system since then. So if I'm just saying, I don't mean to put like Sri Lanka and Sri Lankans down, but the level of person, government official that I met in India, there's not many in Sri Lanka. Like in our politics, there's plenty of Sri Lankans, but it's not in our politics.
Not the caliber, not the same.
The caliber, just the way they think. I mean, I don't know how to use the word caliber, but it's just, they're just not on the same level. Like, it's like you watch like Australia play cricket and then you watch Ireland play cricket. Like, you know, it's just not the same thing. Like, so you can see that these people are working from a point of an overarching strategy, whereas we are not, even our ministries aren't like linked to each other. They just do their own things. Like,
But why do we lack that thinking though, as a country, you think?
I think we just fell into a trap where the incentives are just all wrong. Like, the public service was politicized in like the 70s and the 80s by successive governments. So then the people that went into the ministries, the civil service, these were not people who were the cream of the crop because the pay was crap, you know, and it was a relatively easy job. You don't have many prospects, but you get a pension. So it attracted a certain type of person into that. So then that's the civil service. Then the political class, you know, from J.R. Jayawardenas and Lalitatlat Mudali's and SWRD Bandaranayakas, whatever the criticisms of these DSN Nayakas, whatever the criticism of N.M. Pereira, these are people that would walk into any room anywhere in the world and sit with any intellectual and they could have a conversation, like any one of them. And if I would ask your audience, if you guys like politics, like just go and read anything DSN Nayaka wrote, his own writing. Go and read anything SWRD Bandaranayakas wrote. I'll tell you, one of the best Sri Lankan writers that I've ever read is SWRD Bandaranayakas. Like, there was a late academic called Dr. Harshana Ramukal who published Bandaranayakas, SWRD's personal memoirs. The memoirs he wrote when he was at Oxford, for instance, right? And you can see this guy that his writing is like, there's nobody in Sri Lanka that writes like this right now. Like, it's just the way he constructs sentences and the way he thinks. And some of the things, he was a member of Sri Lanka's aristocracy, right? Okay. He is, and when you're talking about aristocracy in Sri Lanka at the time, Ceylon, that's a British colony, right? You're getting the best education in the world through this British colonial system. You rock up at Oxford as the son of a scion of one of the most powerful, and you think, these are my people, right? These are the people that are going to accept me. They'll understand me and I'll understand them. Instead, he found himself somewhat ostracized because British high society was like, even this guy's just a Sri Lankan.
Yeah.
Even he's educated, he's well read, he speaks well. He's nobody.
Yeah.
And then in his diary, SWRD wrote, I'm paraphrasing, but he wrote, I realized then that before becoming their equals, I needed to become their master, right? And what did he do? He entered the Oxford Debating Society, and he became within a year the best debater in Oxford. And he wrote like, the first time he really gave us a powerful speech, and he stopped, and the applause he got, and he stood up, and in walking he realized that people were giving him an applause that he hadn't, the kind of applause you don't regularly receive as a speaker.
Right.
And this was one of those moments in his life when he realized that I do belong here, because that self-doubt was creeping. And it just gives you a window into the kind of people that they were. They are very flawed people, right? Very flawed, but they're intellectually like concrete. There's an ideology there. That's deteriorated. And it's understandable because those kinds of people have no reason to go into government, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason to go into politics. What are you going to achieve? Very little. Like, you might get your name on a plaque somewhere. And for some of those people that doesn't matter, but the people that it matters, they'll come into politics all day long, and they'll stay as long as it takes, right? To get their name on a wall somewhere, to get a cricket ground named after them, to have a bill in their name. So this is kind of where we are. Like, the incentives are all wrong. Like, so we keep saying now they've passed something to take away the pensions of MPs. MPs already get paid nothing. Like, what is it? Like 100,000 rupees altogether?
Yeah.
Right? So we are really depending on 225 very charitable, altruistic people to put aside all their personal ambition and just serve the country. This is the system that we are expecting. Then this is the outcome that we're going to get. Like, pay people for the job that they want to do.
Yeah.
Like, give them a competitive salary.
Yeah.
If you get into the cabinet, you need to have some qualification, some business experience, something to show that you belong on the cabinet, not that you're the big guy in your party. That shouldn't be the case. Like, you can be a big guy in your party, but you can be an MP. But if you're on the cabinet, if you're the Minister of Education, or the Minister of Finance, now the Minister of Finance in India has a double economics degree, right? So she's been in government for 25 years. She's worked at the Finance Ministry. That's the person you need.
Yep.
Jai Shankar is a foreign policy expert. He's written books on the subject. He was the foreign secretary. And mind you, even with India, all of India's greatness, the first foreign secretary to become foreign minister. Because it just doesn't happen. The civil service and the political class, they have
It's separate.
It's separated. But this guy was a foreign secretary. And ideally, once you finish as foreign secretary, he went to the corporate. He was working for Tata, for a defense contract essentially, right? But Modi said, I need you to be the... So he said, okay, I'll leave this multi-million rupee salary and I'll come work for the government. And why? Because he's not just going to come there to be Modi's mouthpiece, right? He's there to tell Modi, this is what you should be doing. And that's what we need. Like right now, Anil Kumar Dissanayake is the finance minister, the president, the defense minister. So you got him, this is the smartest guy. And before this, when I was on a debate show with Lakmali, I think she's Lakmali Fonseca, member of parliament from the National List for the NPP. I told her, what is the point in having, we are here because we've had these concentrations of power. Your party came in saying system change. So why did your president take up the finance ministry and still holding on to it? No, he's the most capable person. I'm like, with all due respect to Anil Kumar Dissanayake, he's not the most capable person to handle finance in the country or in the government. I just don't think so. Then she said, there are really capable deputy finance ministers. And one of them is Harshan Suryaperumal, Dr. Harshan Suryaperumal. 2 months later, he was out of the ministry as the deputy minister and he became the secretary. And that's never happened. With all the PB Jayasundaras and all the Charita Ratwatas, it's never happened that you've had a sitting MP, a deputy finance minister just wake up one day and then take up the one of the most senior civil service positions in the country. It's never happened. And people are like, this is a good government, they're doing governance well. I'm like, they're not. Like, just look around, they're not. So it's a worry for me. Like, we asked for this governance diagnostic report. It literally says, president holding ministries, other portfolios such as finance is detrimental to governance. It literally says that. And that was 2 years ago, after our economy collapsed. And we're still doing the same thing. And it's all fine until it's fine, right? Yeah. But when something collapses...
Yeah. Well, he could be the most competent person on planet Earth, but having 4 or 5 ministerial portfolios is a tough task for anybody to govern,
But what was his rationale when he made the decision?
It's just the thing that's done, right? Because the president has always been the defense minister.
Yeah.
Right? And the finance minister has always been the president.
But how would
Gotabaya put his brother. So,
But how do you think his party took that? Because why would they accept that?
because he's the reason they
That
want
they're there anyways.
So what I keep telling people about the majority in parliament is the NPP didn't really earn this majority. Like the NPP is, whatever you think of them as a party, they won because of the wave of Anurag Dissanayake. That's the only reason they won. So next time around, don't expect a 160 or 159 majority. That's not going to happen because people have already seen that most of the and remember, guys, this is another really important point that people miss, right? A member of parliament, when you're elected into parliament, you're elected from a constituency. So you serve that constituency. Yes, you belong to a political party, but you're primarily meant to represent your constituency. Here, what's happening is the people are basically going by what the party says.
Yeah.
And I think previous governments also there is that to a certain extent. Because if you take, just to shift to politics really quickly, the main thing that this government said in their manifesto was that they were going to renegotiate the IMF program, reduce the cost of living, renegotiate IMF program, bring new DSA, build more fiscal space, make investments in productive sectors and social assistance. This was their whole game.
Yeah.
So if you're voting for them, you would have at some point come across this. So then 2 years later, when you haven't put a new DSA, you're going ahead with the same IMF program, you haven't increased social assistance, you haven't increased any sort of, there's no increase in education spending or health spending relative to GDP. There's nothing like that. So those MPs should be sensitive to their like when they come back to me and be like, how am I doing? Be like, you haven't done anything for me. What are you doing in parliament? But that's just not happening, right? They'll feel it, right? For now, people are happy now when Suresh Sali, the former national security guy, got arrested. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
It's a big positive. When Namal has one of these court cases and Ranil's wife gets brought in, that's red meat to the base. Some people will be happy. But a lot of people in another year's time, when the cost of living when things keep getting crunched up, the cost of living is not going to decrease. That's the problem. So unless wages suddenly, from somewhere we have economic growth or a wage increase, in another 2 years, people are going to be like, these guys are shit, what are we doing here? Like, let's change these guys as well. And then at that point, look, I'm from a liberal party, and I'll tell you, liberal parties don't win in Sri Lanka. Liberal parties just don't win because we're just not populist enough, we're not nationalistic enough, so we'll always lose. So who else is going to come? You know the next person who's going to come, right? And then, good luck again. Same thing that happened in Gotabaya, right? I was crying out loud. I was telling people, look, Gotabaya has no idea what he's doing. Yeah. He released his manifesto about a year before the election, and the manifesto was very clear on tax cuts. And we were already in a fiscal consolidation period. We were already in an IMF program. Like, we had already decided to increase tax to GDP because our tax to GDP was too low. Everyone was telling us this. And Gotabaya came and said, no, we have to cut tax. Taxes are too high in Sri Lanka. The JVP agreed with it. The corporate sector agreed with it. The Sri Lankan Chamber of Commerce put a full-page advertisement saying what a good idea this would be. And the day they passed the tax legislation, there were multiple business people who put advertisements out saying what a great thing this is for the country. Not a single one of them apologized. Not a single one of them. Find me one corporate sector guy, one guy who came up and said, we were wrong about supporting these tax cuts. Find me one guy. There's not one person. And right now the people from the CCC are, from the Sri Lankan Chamber of Commerce, Sri Lanka, for instance, is a great guy, I've met him. He's advising AKD as well. The very people who were advising for the tax cuts. So I'm sitting there at the bank thinking, tax cuts? Like, what? Tax cuts? Because honestly, VAT was too high. We were paying at the time like 20, maybe even 22% for VATs. Okay, so Sri Lanka has this problem where everyone feels overtaxed, right? But the tax revenue is also just not enough relative to GDP. That's because we have one of the most regressive tax systems in the world where we had a ratio, I don't know about now, but we had a ratio of about 80-20. 80% is indirect taxes. Indirect taxes is VAT, sales taxes, import duty, those things. These are regressive by definition, right? Anybody will tell you, because the lower you are in the income bracket, the more of your income you spend for consumption. The higher you are, it's minuscule. It's like, it's nothing. So if you keep taxing consumption, you're obviously going to get more tax revenue from the poorer people. And then you come to income tax. We have amongst the lowest income tax to GDP ratios in our peer group. We have amongst the lowest corporate tax to GDP ratios in our peer group. Between 2022 and 2024, there was an 18-month period. The IMF, Shamini Qureshi, who was the IMF director, former IMF director, she gave a speech and she said the data is that Sri Lankan government lost or had to forego 900 billion rupees of tax revenue, corporate tax revenue in 18 months after the collapse.
Oh.
After the collapse, right? Just from the tax cuts, the treasury lost 800 billion rupees in a single year. Did we make any less? So when you have a tax cut, who benefits? The people who benefit are the people who pay the most in tax, right? So who pays the most in tax? The people with the highest incomes.
Yeah.
So the people with the highest incomes benefited the most from the tax cuts. So after the economy collapsed, did you hear about special tax for very rich people? Did you hear about a super tax on super profits? Did you hear about a one-off tax on profits over 5 billion? Because remember, Ravi Karnanayaka brought a one-off super tax as finance minister under Yahapalnya in the first year of Yahapalnya. Something like 15% special tax on profits over 2 billion for 1 year or 2 years, right? Just the basic super tax, and everyone paid it.
Yeah.
This government did nothing of the sort. Even this government, left progressive government, like Marxist-Leninists, they're still maintaining a highest income tax rate of 36%. And and the other thing is, I have friends who are in banking who stayed on in the industry, and they'll be making 1.5 million bucks a month. They're paying 25-27% tax. That sounds like okay, reasonable, but if you add how much tax they pay at the fuel pump, how much tax they pay on import duty, on VAT, and 1.5 million rupees a month is the aspirational class. These are the people you want saving money, investing their money, starting businesses, building homes. These are the people you want doing this stuff. But if they're paying 20% tax, but meanwhile, we had a presidential candidate, the guy who owns Other Derana, Dilip Jaivira, who, when all the MPs gave their salaries, because they had to do financial disclosures, some MPs like Sajith Premadasa said 300,000, Ranil Wickremesinghe said 180,000. One of the lawyers said 1.2 million a month. Dilip Jaivira said 16 million rupees salary a month.
Oh, wow.
That was his monthly income. That's what he disclosed in the papers. So I'm just thinking, your 16 million, your highest tax rate will only be 36%. Whereas my friend who's making 1.5 million a month is paying 28%. So there's a 6% gap between you guys. That's it. So you can see this tax system is completely bonkers. Like people who shouldn't be paying tax so much, that person should be paying about 20%. Who's making 1 million, 1.5 million. Because ideally the person who's making 200,000 should be paying like 1% of that, right?
Yeah.
And that is the case, I think, in some cases. But again, they're paying indirect taxes.
But isn't this part of the IMF pressure that's coming about to put a broad base of taxpayers? Because I always hear them say, your base of taxpayers is not big enough, you need a broader base. But I feel like they don't really understand the regression of it.
They made the base smaller in their first year, in the first budget, because they reduced they increased the threshold, the tax-free threshold. They took it from 100,000 to 150,000. So that reduces the number of taxpayers. So they immediately reduce the tax net, right? So to give people to give people relief, yes, but you also reduce the tax net. It's not what you should be doing. What Singapore does is, even you earn a minuscule amount, you pay a tiny tax, because then you are used to it. Right now, guys, I don't know if you, I just got a headache thinking about it. They released these cards. Did you see the privilege cards for taxpayers?
Yes, very recently, like a couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago.
Yeah. You didn't see the privilege card?
So if you're a taxpayer I think the numbers might be wrong. I think if your income tax bill is over 5 million, you're eligible to get into these schemes. I don't know what the privileges are, but you get a gold card and a silver card, depending on how much tax you pay.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, what is this idea? Like, so the people who aren't paying tax were just waiting for a privilege card to start paying tax.
Yeah, and now they're going to be happy because they have a privilege card.
Yeah, so I mean, these are the kinds of ideas that they're coming up with, right? To improve tax to GDP. Whereas if you take a country like Georgia, a very corrupt Eastern European country, right? With huge amounts of money, but very low tax GDP. I think it's like 2014 or something, one of the presidents came in and said, no, we need higher taxes. And he invested aggressively in their internal revenue system, brought in like digital systems, formalized the informal economy, and they increased by like 6-7% tax to GDP. Mexico has done something, but you have to invest. So I argued during the last election cycle, I argued for like military style spending on the Inland Revenue Department and on customs, because that's where most of the revenue leakages happen. So you have to invest not 1 billion, I'm saying like any amount it takes. If you need to get rid of half the workforce, get rid of half the workforce and hire new people. If you need to form new legislation to get rid of those people, because we have strict labor laws, you have a 159 supermajority in parliament. You could do it.
You could transition.
You could transition. but they're not doing any of these things. And but why is that? It's because they know that they don't really have that mandate. The mandate is for AKD. So AKD, that's why AKD rocks up in parliament every time some controversial thing happens. He comes as finance minister, makes a speech in parliament and goes.
Yeah.
Why? Why is the executive walking into parliament and randomly making a speech? You know? Because he's the only guy that people actually look to and be like, okay, I trust AKD. I like AKD. If Sajith wasn't a candidate, I would have probably voted for AKD because I think he's pragmatic. I mean, he's also this new type of Marxist. They're all Marxists. They're all left-leaning, but they've moderated it. And you see how he speaks. He talks about even their manifesto was called "A Beautiful Life and a Promising Nation" or something, right? So that beautiful life is important. He talks about how wouldn't you like to go for a movie after work? Wouldn't you like to spend a little extra time with your loved ones? They bring in a quality of life aspect to it. So it's not just about, is the country developing, is the economy doing better? How is your quality of life? Do your kids have a route for upward economic mobilization? That's the conversation that they had. Whereas the SJB, we formed like a technocratic argument. Our manifesto was very technocratic. I helped with it as well. And we have to admit, it wasn't populist enough. It didn't hit the right, like think about it guys, like I would just explain to you, we're in a country, record poverty by Sri Lankan standards, record poverty by regional standards, huge concentrations of power, huge concentrations of wealth where people in the rice industry are buying Rolls Royces, right? And what is rice? Rice is a staple food. Why is rice a staple? Because it's abundant. The staple food is usually abundant and it's usually cheap. That's why it's called a staple food, because everyone's there to eat. What is a staple food? It's low margin. So if you're in a low margin sector, how the hell are you buying a Rolls Royce in a country where 17,000 is the poverty line, right? This is a market failure. There's no other way to look at it, right? But do you see any policy that even, people are on Twitter, on Facebook, they're like, oh, you're just jealous of his Rolls Royce. I'm jealous of his dog in the Rolls Royce. That's not the point. That's not the point. I could be jealous. We could all be jealous. But why does he ask the question? Is it right that this guy has a Rolls Royce? Do the farmers make enough money for him to have a Rolls Royce? It's weird. But this is not something that's in the discourse. Like it's just not. We don't think of it that way. We think everyone has a right to be successful. Someday I could have a Rolls Royce, and that's what everyone thinks. Everyone thinks someday I could have one of 100 Rolls Royces. I could have that. So don't put any limits on wealth. Don't put any limits on power. Don't put any, because nowhere in economics does it say that there is nothing wrong with concentration of power. Concentration of wealth and power is a problem. It's a market failure. It's literally defined as such. Right? Monopolies are a thing. Oligopolies are a thing. That's why these words are there, right? Modern economics doesn't, like in the US, the concentrations of power and wealth are insane, right? They're off the charts, but it's not an economic problem. It's not looked as an economic problem, even though it clearly is. Like economics says, persistent super profits is a sign of market distortion.
Right.
That's clear. Like if you're making super profits, and there is a definition of super profits, if you meet that definition year after year after year, and you must have because you bought a Rolls Royce in an extremely poor, low middle income country, something's wrong somewhere, right? But no one's going to pay attention to that.
I assume that definition of super profits depends on the circumstance.
Of course.
So so you've been always insisting that Sri Lanka should develop, and the SJB should develop an export-oriented development strategy, and you've suggested that we don't even have industrial policy export development. So let's just say, what are the 3 things that you would want to implement now practically that would bring about the most effective outcome? If you could think about it, maybe like the 80-20 principle, like what are the little things that would bring about 80% of the gain?
I would just start with this, okay? The first thing you want to do is to understand where the growth sectors are, right? So right now, technology and electronics is the thing. Everything is growing like that, okay? So manufacturing. So there's this idea that a lot of people have that Sri Lanka should focus on services, right? Tourism, financial services, ports, education, that this is our future. My point has always been that no country has achieved and sustained high income status through a service-led economy. That's just, I asked a couple of forums this, and nobody could give me an answer. If you could name a country that did that. India tried this in the 90s. They did the BPO, they had the BPO growth, the WPO growth. What are they doing now? Made in India. Now they're trying to get into manufacturing, right? Because they realize that the value capture from services is just not enough to justify like a focus on services. Services do grow. There's an academic called Danny Roderick who talks about this thing called premature industrialization, premature deindustrialization, where if you look at countries like, let's say, who are the countries who are post-industrial? Let's say in Asia, let's say Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong was an industrial country. It's post-industrial now. But they moved away from industrialization after reaching a certain income level, a certain GDP income level. What Danny Roderick found was that a lot of countries were deindustrializing before it reached that higher middle income status. And when that happens, you find these other headwinds in the economy where the transition to services was too quick. The liberalizations was too quick. Local companies lost competitiveness. Employment dropped. Gig economy started out, right? These are things that are studied now. Like it's
Is that because they liberalized their service section too soon to international markets?
It's that they didn't industrialize far enough. Like, for example, Sri Lanka industrialized in the 90s with garments. Samsung started with garments. They were a textile manufacturing company in the 1950s and 60s. They did textile manufacturing and food processing. They went to the South Korean government in the 70s and said, we want to expand our textile industry and we want to get new technology, higher value garments, what Hydromani and MS are doing right now. They want to do that, right? The government said, yeah, we'll give you a soft loan, we'll give you some land, we'll do all this. But there's also this growing technology industry, and there's the semiconductors manufacturing thing that's just coming up. There's some foreign firms that are looking at it. Would you be interested? Samsung went back, they did their own math, and they said, this is something if you could give us some R&D capital, some soft loans, concessionary finance, we could actually do this. That's why they're here today. Because they went and they spoke to the government, and they got together and they did this thing, right? And today Samsung is a leader in multiple technology industries.
I mean,
right?
they pretty much run that economy.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember people would not want to buy a Samsung, even a microwave, because you're like, I'd rather buy the Japanese Mitsubishi or whatever, because it's Japanese. Who thinks that way about South Korea?
South Korea.
Nobody thinks that way about South Korea. And that's like, if you tell that to Sri Lankan policymakers now, they're like, yeah, but we can never get that way. Our people aren't like, they don't have the ingenuity, we don't have the education level. So I'm like, yeah, but how did all these countries do it then? So this is the problem that I have, is that there are these countries, the Asian tigers, for example, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, China, all these countries, they have some few things in common. And one of them is export-oriented industrialization. Each of them. Singapore, for instance, people think is a service-oriented economy. It is still not considered a post-industrial economy. It is still anchored in industrial output. It has amongst the highest manufacturing value add per capita in the world. I think number one or number two, right? They have like 50% of exports is high technology exports. Aeronautical instruments, semiconductor equipment, machines, electronics. So this idea that countries just woke up one day and they became service-oriented, it's just not the case. It's just not. Even people use Hong Kong. Hong Kong was also an industrial state. Also. So every country you look at, South Korea, Taiwan, every country that succeeded, these so-called late-stage industrial countries like Japan, they're all late-stage industrializers. We just didn't make that step from garments into that next stage. And people would blame the war, people would blame all sorts of things, but every country has had some kind of problem. It's just that it's policy.
To strawman you on that, Kusum, if you think about the four tigers in Asia, all of them were pretty much decimated by war before they
Singapore?
Well, other than Singapore.
Really.
But Singapore was
Kong.
also, they were very poor, right?
Taiwan.
Extremely poor.
Taiwan didn't. I mean, Taiwan. The war was in China, and then they shifted to Taiwan.
But at the end of the day, like let me take Japan and South Korea. Maybe Japan in particular. Now, Japan was already one of the most advanced economies, pre-World War II. And then they were decimated, and America basically opened up the markets and gave them cash. But they already knew what to do with that money. They had already built up a system. What do we even if America said, here's all the money, here, do it. What are we going to, would we know what to do with that?
Yeah,
we have the skills?
that's a fair point. But I think the point to make is that with Japan, for instance, yes, it was a far more advanced society than us, 100%. So we are not going to shift, we are not going to be Japan. with $1 billion or $10 billion or whatever. But we have to start sowing those seeds eventually, right? And if we did the garment industry in the 90s, there's no reason why we can't do the next thing. Now, there's already, like for example, it's about technical expertise, let's take. Sri Lanka has plenty of technical expertise.
Do it?
I mean, they're all abroad.
I
Because
mean,
the place is crap.
Yeah.
But you build something here and they'll come.
Yeah,
Because every Sri Lankan knows if we had a chance to come to Sri Lanka and
They
live
will
here and
take
live a half-day basic, like half-decent life,
They'll
most
take
of these
it.
guys would do it.
Yeah.
But you look at NASA, how many Sri Lankans? Head of Caltech, Sri Lankan. Head of UK Cancer Research, Sri Lankan. These are not normal things. Like a country like Sri Lanka, with our population, should not be this represented in these high technology fields. Like I'm saying, it's not
Absolutely,
not normal.
Yeah.
Like it's like cricket. Like there is, if you look at the cricket like records, I just looked at Chamindavasa's records. Right, Chamindavas is not going to go down in history as like one of the all-time, but he holds all these one-day international records. How is Sangakkara, a Sri Lankan batsman, amongst the highest averages in Test cricket history? Like he has a higher average than Jacques Kallis, and he's a wicketkeeper. There's no other wicketkeeper who's done that. Muralidharan, 800 wickets. These are things that, like, for whatever reason, whether it's our education, like cricket is a very obvious thing. Right? We had expertise transferred to us through centuries of colonialism for cricket. We had a school cricket structure that produced top-level cricketers. Now that's diluted again right now, but that expertise is what economics is also. That's expertise. If like a top cardiologist stays in Sri Lanka instead of going to England, going to Australia, the other cardiologists that come in are going to benefit from that guy being here.
Yeah.
But if he goes abroad, the next guy who's going to be lecturing is not going to be as good. And then his students are not going to be as good. And then little by little, for Japan, they were, yes, 100%. But then South Korea? How did South Korea become this like sensation, not only like electronics, pop culture, right? Cosmetics.
I mean, I would say a big part of that was just purely American sport, like purely American, big time.
The state, for example, with K-Beauty, I mean, there's nothing American about that, right? There's just local companies who are doing stuff with cosmetics. And they went to the government and said, we need a bit of help. We need a bit of R&D. And they said, all right, do it.
Yeah, I take your point.
And then it just comes up. And with Japan is a great point because Japan and Germany both, they were extremely strict with foreign currency, right? They were not allowing their exporters to keep their dollars, and they were like, you better remit every single cent to our central bank or you are not getting your trade license.
Right.
And that kind of thing we do, I mean, we've had capital controls in Sri Lanka, but there is obvious siphoning off, right? And that's not good or bad. I'm saying it's detrimental to the project that we have internally because we need foreign currency. So that's why when I was in the bank, there was this thing the central bank introduced called a Form 1. So all the exporters had to fill in this new form where it just kind of gives you a little extra, like it's going to be a little extra few questions to answer when you bring back your money from your sales. Then they just have to check, you took out this much there was this much RM raw materials that came in. This is your usual GP, gross profit margin. So this is how much you should have, your sales price might have been. That's how you kind of calculate. But only MS or whoever manufacturing, they really know what their margin is, right?
Right.
So that's how so previously in Japan, for instance,
They didn't know the data for it.
No, for example, in Japan, they were like, no, if you're going to we need this much foreign currency back.
Right.
Or you're going to lose your license. And those seem like anti-market things to do. They are, right? But these kinds of protectionist policies are how every country has developed. Like from the US to Singapore, like name it, just name it. Every country from Switzerland. Switzerland is one example where people kind of bring about a libertarian kind of argument. But Switzerland also uses centralized power, but they use it in their cantons, in their little provinces.
Right.
It's still a centralized government. It's still a government telling this family, we'll give you money if you get into this business, we'll help you with this much land. It's still a form of centralization. And that was also, Switzerland is a very technical economy, right? Watches, instruments, all that stuff, medical devices. That's
very high-end
high-end value. And Switzerland has been that way for centuries, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm curious. So a lot of what you're suggesting is we need, at the end of the day, to make that investment to grow into these sorts of different diversified export-oriented fields. But as you had rightly pointed out earlier, we have so much interest on our debt to pay going down to 2032 that I don't see any way that we are absolutely going to grow out of it, or even probably make those interest payments alone, just the interest alone. So, we could sit and talk about export-oriented strategies all day, but if we can't make those investments and make those payments on time, where are we headed to?
So I like that the way you framed your question is exactly right, because we can't grow our way out of this. And why I say that is, like, I don't know if you recall the third quarter last year, so Q3 2025, something like 4.9% GDP growth. But I looked into just that quarter, and it was driven by infrastructure, vehicle imports, because vehicle imports is also part of GDP. Even though GDP minus imports and exports, the person who's importing keeps a margin. The bank that's lending makes a margin. So
the person
who imports makes a margin, right? The dealer makes a margin, right? So the bank that's giving the finance makes a margin.
Yeah.
That all adds to GDP. So the problem is you will have GDP growth, but GDP also, or tourism. Tourism is a great example, okay? One of our main foreign exchange earning methods is tourism, okay? But we don't have a system that accurately calculates or captures how much actual foreign exchange we earn from tourism. There is no, so what we depend on when we say we make $4 billion is exit surveys from tourists, some kind of average room rate, multiplied by the number of days they spend here, plus some cost of living addition, and we estimate how much money we make. We don't actually know how much dollars flows into the economy from tourism. So that's the revenue side. On the cost side, tourism drives imports. Like some part of tourism drives imports, because if they consume something, if they consume a beer, some of the ethanol is imported, right? It's not local.
Right.
Some of the hotel construction, if you build a hotel, where does the construction material come from? It's mostly imported, right? So tourism also drives, so there's a netting effect also. That's another problem with services, that you're not really getting, that's what I meant, value capture. So when you add these things, you're making the argument you're making, for example, we will be spending something like 30 to 40% of total revenue on debt service when we start full debt repayments. And our fiscal anchor says 2.3% primary account surplus of GDP. So, okay, if we are growing, yeah, we could probably achieve that. But on the other side, if we are growing and we already accept that our growth drives some level of imports as well, right? And we are a net importer. That's why we've had a trade deficit pretty much every year until this economic collapse. Every year we have a trade deficit, right? So in such a context, what's going to happen? The rupee is going to keep depreciating against the dollar.
Right.
It depreciated last year about 5-6%. This year it will do the same. And this is in a context where it's still not a free float. I will never believe this is a free float. The rupee is still overvalued, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think their range is now up to 310 wage, it went to about 315 also, if I'm not mistaken, right? This time next year it could be 320, 322. That means imports are becoming more expensive. That means our debt stock is becoming more expensive because the currency changed.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying this. It's like this IMF program, people are like, what's the alternative solution? I'm like, but this is not a solution. First, let's understand that the IMF is giving us a bunch of intended targets. We reach those, we think our debt is sustainable.
Yeah.
But this is not, for example, the IMF's own plan requires that we borrow about $1 billion to $1.5 billion every year from the international sovereign bond market, right? So by about 2032, we will have a huge ISB stock. And we got into this problem because, and I remember this very well, like it was yesterday, because I joined the banking sector, and that year was when Cabral, 2007 or 2008, went on Sri Lanka's first ever investment roadshow for a bond. And at the time, we were like, yeah, this is great. Like, it's really important to go to the capital markets and show your treasury's projections and show we are worthy, even if we are double B or whatever, but we are worthy of your capital.
Yeah.
So 5-10% of our external debt will be commercial ISBs. We were like, yeah, that's good.
5-10%.
Fine, do it, 5-10%. This went up by the time Yahapalaya went out of office. Yahapalaya did a lot of borrowing in Iceland. This is when things started, in my head, I was watching Yahapalaya and I'm like, and I've had this argument with not the governor himself, but a deputy governor, and I've written extensively, argued on interpersonally, I've argued on Twitter. I think Yahapalya should take some responsibility for the debt crisis because they increased our ISB portfolio to 40% of our total external debt. No other country in our peer group has ever had anything like 20%, let alone 40%, right? And when you have 40% ISBs, your rollover risk, every year you're borrowing more. And every year you borrow more, it puts more pressure on your ratings. And when your ratings come down, your bonds become more expensive. The bonds become less valuable in the market, and the rate goes up. It's a snowball effect. And right now we're just going back to the same place. We just want to reach 2018 Sri Lanka. That's what we're trying to reach. And that's back to where we were, where we will have, if you look at the IMF's quarterly reviews, if you go to the end, there's this table, right, gives the projections up to like 2032 or something. And you can see that they show the trade deficit, it's ballooning. The external debt to GDP just keeps going up. The total external debt stock is also increasing, the total amount of debt. So that's the other part. The other part is the restructuring program. The restructuring program is going to leave us. It's not, so again, from the finance, from banking, I looked at this and I'm like, they are only giving you a moratorium, which means your interest is still piling up. If you ever had a business, I had travel businesses when the Easter attack happened, when COVID happened. We took moratoriums from the bank. All it does is say you don't have to pay for 6 months or 3 months. But the interest is still going to get charged. So by the time you finish the 6 months, you have a whole new pile of debt waiting for you.
Because you waited, the interest rose.
Because you can't pay. But the bank is not taking a hit. The bank is just saying you pay us later. That's what we're doing. Our cash flows, we're discounting our future cash flows. And that's giving us a positive net present value for future debt. That means our future cash flows for the next up to 2040 something is less. But the amount of debt we are paying is never going to reduce. That debt stock remains the same. Our debt steps up, the debt payments step up post 2040. By then, let's hope we'll solve all this and have some other avenues to pay. But by 2040 something, we will have exactly the amount of debt, exponentially more external debt than we did when our economy crashed in 2022.
But this, you're talking about the nominal debt.
External debt.
The nominal external debt without taking into consideration of the currency. That's crazy.
So this is my only, so even Nandalal, the central bank governor, who I respect, whatever, right? But he's been saying some crazy things, guys. Like, I just want to point out, like when Ditwa happened, when the cyclone happened, he came on TV and he said, there will be no impact on debt sustainability from this cyclone. Those are his words. So he's saying because when you have a climate crisis or some kind of natural disaster, there are sectoral benefits where construction has a boom in the next 3 months because you have a rebuilding. So there is so that makes up for this loss of GDP. But he is an economist and he knows that GDP is not the only thing. There's also something called productivity, right? So I can't destroy a building, rebuild it and say GDP growth, right? No one's going to take me seriously if I do that. So how can he say, he's literally saying our debt sustainability analysis is not altered by a once-in-a-generation cyclone. What does that tell you? That means our debt sustainability is not really anchored to the real economy, if what he's saying is true. If what he's saying is true, that means whatever happens in the real economy doesn't matter because we are going to make these debt payments anyway. That's what he's saying. And this is the problem that I have, is that Cabral did the same thing. Creditors and foreign debt payments above everything else. Same thing that the Ranil Wickremesinghe government did. Financial stability, monetary stability above everything else. The IMF, this neo-colonial, really bad, evil organization, they said at least spend a minimum 1% flow on social assistance, 1% of GDP. We didn't even do that. We made 0.9%. In a context where people were friggin' in queues, they couldn't afford jack. In that context, we couldn't even reach the IMF's own benchmark of 1% of GDP. That was the Ranil Wickremesinghe government. That's why I criticized that government, because I said you came in, you basically protected, nobody does no case against anybody for the tax cuts and for the agricultural policy. Completely against all the evidence. Like, if I'm driving a car and there's a tree in front of me, and everyone's like, you're driving the car into the tree, and I'm driving the car into the tree, and I bang the car into the tree, somebody in that car should say, you really should not have driven this car into the tree, and you should probably go to jail for this. But Gotabaya, his brothers, who was the Treasury Secretary at the time?
Basil.
No, he was
No,
finance
finance
minister. No? I
minister.
don't remember the treasury. So all these people, you had central bankers, you had finance ministry economists, researchers. Did you hear a single one of them say these tax cuts are a bad idea? Did you hear a single one of them? Did you see a queue of people resigning when the only person who resigned, and I don't know if I should say this, but he's my former boss, he's the former CEO of the FCC Bank, Nihal Fonseca, member of the monetary board. He resigned from the monetary board just after Gotabaya became president. And I remember telling a colleague, a former colleague, I said, this is a warning sign, because Nihal Fonseca is not a guy who needs to retire from the monetary board. He's a retired banker. The monetary board is it's not a place you retire from. You can just sit there for as long as you need. It's a very technical position.
Right.
He's perfect for this job. He's been in the job for 5-6 years. Why is he resigning? And now we know why he resigned, because he knew what was coming. Like, he knew that we were in crazy land. Like, these guys were doing crazy things. And here we are. Like, not a single person is held responsible for, like, generational policy failures. You know? That's not normal. Like, it's a generational policy failure where, our poverty rate went from like 8% to 25%, guys.
It's horrendous.
That's horrendous. People lost lives, livelihoods, but not a single thing. They just went out of power. And they were scared for their lives for a few weeks. That was it. Right? So, accountability, where is it? It's going to keep happening, right? So now this Easter attack, 250 people died. There's papers telling us which churches were going to get hit.
Yeah.
So this is serious stuff. Like, we had a bond scam where there's no country in the world where the central bank governor, his son-in-law with a primary dealership, where they fix the rate and increase the value of the bonds. That's never happened in central bank. My brother was at HSBC. He was fairly high up. He was like number 2 or number 3 in charge. He had like 2-hour-long conversations with his bosses in Hong Kong and India, because explaining to them that this is not such a big deal, and Sri Lanka is not completely on the verge of financial collapse, even though there was this insane insider trading deal that happened involving the prime minister, the finance minister. It's bonkers, and still no one went to jail for that. Nobody, right? Actually, no. The 2 guys from Arjun Aloysius and one of his partners at the firm went to jail.
Well, but he's living a good life in Singapore.
He's living a good life. And no, that's Mahendran, the governor.
Mahendran, right.
Aloysius is the guy who owns the primary dealership.
The primary dealership.
Perpetual dealer.
Isn't he also in Singapore?
No, I actually don't know.
Not
Maybe
sure.
he's
I
out
think
now.
so.
Know. But this is what I mean. So, it's not about the value of the money. It's not about how much the country lost. It's about the institution that you just completely destroyed the credibility of, dude. It's like the central bank is our regulator. Like, you just destroyed the credibility of the financial regulator. Like, this is not normal,
Yeah.
So I just I don't even know what we were talking about before. Sorry, I get really fucking pissed off with these people. Man.
No, I totally get it. It's so frustrating, which is why I initially asked you, how did you manage to just like stay sane in this sort of environment?
Honestly, because I wasn't in that environment during all this happening. I was kind of on the
Fair
outside,
enough,
so I've only really been since the collapse. Like,
I understand.
been into it since that. If SW was never going to be in power anyway during that time. And I don't even know whether, like, the big conversation about whether Sajith Premadasa should have taken on the prime minister post, because people say that he didn't want to take it on. It's not the case. But then internally also, we were like, is this the way to take it on? Shouldn't we get a majority in parliament? Should we ask for election? What's the best way? There's a lot of back and forth there. So maybe those were tactical mistakes. I don't know. But I just don't see that anything could have changed once Gotabaya implemented his policies.
There was no reversing it after that.
I mean, he could have reversed it within a few months.
I mean, he could have. I mean, so because we were talking about the interest payments needed and the IMF and stuff, and you were saying like the IMF is not a solution. Obviously,
no, in the sense
right?
like the IMF is not a development partner. It's
Absolutely,
it's a stability partner.
Yes.
It's a solvency, liquidity partner, and that's what they're there for. They're very open about that, right? So
I was hoping you could shed some light on something I saw some time ago by the opposition leader, a statement he made, which I thought was really interesting, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. He had suggested we should kind of like put aside the IMF program and deal bilaterally with President Trump and get a deal from them. Was that electoral narrative,
no,
or was
that's
he
not what
serious
he said.
about it?
That's
Or
not
could
what
you like...
Yeah, that's not what he said. He made remarks in Parliament.
Yeah.
Now, when you're speaking in Sinhala and you're trying to make a rhetorical flourish,
Right.
things are going to come a certain way. But he said things in a certain order. He said the first thing he said is, reach out to the IMF. I'm paraphrasing in English,
Sure.
right? Reach out to the IMF and tell them we've just had a once-in-a-generation cyclone and that we need to halt repayments.
Right.
What he meant was cancel the agreement. That cancel word,
Yeah.
there's no singular word that he used that says cancel. That's
Right.
for sure. That was the Daily Mirror that mentioned this, right?
Right.
And I put a thing on Twitter. I said he never said the word cancel because
Right.
we are the SJB and fucking the Sajith Premadasa and all this. We are the
biggest
people who were
promoters.
talking about the. We were saying
The first-
the
you were the
first
first,
people
yeah.
to say go to the IMF in 2020. We were saying go to the IMF because we were saying you're already destroying your fiscal equation.
Yeah.
You need balance of payment support. You need fiscal support. Go to the IMF. Talk to our bilateral partners. So then for the media to come out and say Sajith Premadasa said cancel the. It's bullshit. And what he said is renegotiate this agreement the way you said you would in the first place. So
Right.
and then the other thing he said was talk to Trump about tell Trump we've just had a once in a generation cyclone and we need all the help we can get. Could you maybe put a moratorium on our tariffs for 3 months? That's what he said. That's what he asked for. Does that sound crazy? I mean, that's the kind
Put
of
a
thing that we were-
moratorium on the tariffs
on
for
the
3
tariffs
months.
of 3 months, 6 months. Just give us a moratorium so that our export sector doesn't suffer because we need a little extra help in these next 3 or 6 months. That's all he said, right? But so
Right.
that's how the media twist things around. So, and the fact of the matter is, I'll be open about this. The SJB does not have the kind of media patronage that the other parties have. It just doesn't. And I don't know if you guys watch the news. I watch News First. I watch sometimes Hero News on YouTube. I watch Other News every day. I watch News First every day. If you look at, for example, Parliament has 225 people. So obviously the majority is the NPP. So you give, let's say you have half an hour on the news, you give, let's say 15 minutes to the NPP, the government, okay? Then you have a 50-seat opposition, that's the SJB. Then you have 1 seat UNP, 1 seat Normal, 1 seat Dalit, and 1 seat some other minority parties. How much time you think is allocated to all these opposition parties? Do you think the time allocated to the SJB is equivalent to the 50 seats that we have?
Sure.
It's not, right? The UNP is put on the same pedestal as the SJB. The TNA is put on the all opposition. Right. Go and check on YouTube. There's a YouTube show called The Public Square. Right. The Public Square has never invited me on once in the last 5 years, but they regularly have people from the UNP. Just go and check. Every other week there's someone from the UNP. The UNP has 1 seat in Parliament, so why are they represented on national TV so regularly? Sure. So why is Ranil Wickremesinghe's opinion still valid when he hasn't won a seat in Parliament for 10 years? He hasn't won a seat in Parliament. He hasn't won a seat in Parliament in 10 years, right? He's in Parliament, but that doesn't mean he won a seat. His party didn't run a single candidate in the last election except for one, and that was a member of the Ceylon Workers' Congress, and that was Thondaman in Norelia. So why is the UNP even okay? Give it all the grand old party, the first political party, all that. This is 70 years after independence. Why are they still getting 5 minutes of coverage? Why are you still interviewing the random dude that's never won an election from the UNP like Sagala or whoever? So I mean, I might sound a bit bitter about this, but honestly, even the media, the SJB just doesn't have that patronage. Like we just don't. So that's our fault. I blame ourselves for that.
I mean, fair enough. I mean, but it's all a game at the end of the day,
It's all-
based
we have
on
to play
the
the game.
regulators and
And
the
you have to play
TV
the game.
owners.
You have to play the game.
Yeah. I mean, so I know you can't speak openly about this too much, but because it goes back to what you just mentioned about Ranil being given time and considering it's been 70 years and what has he achieved. I would say, like, from an ideological perspective, I'm sure agrees. We're all on the same boat in terms of free market, in terms of investment, and there aren't a lot of options with that sort of liberalism, except Ranil and now Sajith. But Sajith has lost 2 presidential elections. He's lost general elections. The SJB has not hovered more than 22-23%. There is no credible opposition for people like, there's no credible party for people like us, I feel, that is effective and that can actually get what we want done. So there is a lot of fatigue with, okay, Sajith is still there, he's not going to win. So could I maybe get your perspective on all of that? And
So can I tell you why I supported Sajith Premadasa in the first place, right? I know I said because I'm a UNP, that's why I'm in the SJB. But honestly, I could have voted for the SJB like I voted for the UNP and just not had any involvement in the SJB at all, right? The reason I supported Mr. Premadasa in the first place was I went to a function at a hotel in Bathurmula, the big hotel in Bathurmula, the Monarch or something, the Grand
sure,
Monarch, or
sure.
something, the Imperial Monarch, right? So It was just a campaign event, Q&A session, policy speech, like that. So he had a stage, on stage, not academic. First time I'd heard him speak in English, actually. And I don't know, that day he spoke of two things that really impressed me. One was he brought up FDR and the New Deal. I don't know if you're familiar with President Roosevelt. He's the only US president to win 4 terms. He was president 4 times. Because of him, he died in office. He was so popular, he wasn't losing elections. They brought in term limits to prevent another FDR. He's the guy that basically rebuilt the United States post the Great Depression in the 1930s. Every single major institution in the US, whether it's financial regulation, whether it's healthcare, whether it's labor rights, all of this came under FDR. Just to cycle back a little bit, I call myself a liberal, but I think you have to understand that this term, because also the media that we consume, British media and US media, they also use these terms very differently, liberalism.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to us.
It doesn't, yeah. But if I just explain like liberalism, so 17th century, the Enlightenment period, right? So you're talking about John Stuart Mill, Hobbes, Rousseau, Montesquieu. These are people who basically, the Enlightenment period was basically a rebellion against religion, a rebellion against superstition. It was a way to build a society beyond what was before. So before this, the states were developed around church, developed around, society was built around these things. Rationalism, the scientific method, scientific testing, observation, this is all part of the Enlightenment period. And the central thesis of this Enlightenment period of the 17th century is liberalism. So liberalism, unfortunately, is confused, right? Because liberalism in English also means tolerance, right? So people often confuse liberalism with tolerance. Liberalism is actually not tolerance. Like the political definition of liberalism is a project for human emancipation. And you might think that's the same as freedom, right? And that's where it's really interesting. So there's a difference between freedom and emancipation. Emancipation is about self-actualization. We all human beings have our own sentience, right? We have ideas, we have wants, needs, desires. There are certain things that we do because we have to. There are certain things we do because we want to. And if you take, for example, Adam Smith, who is the father of modern economic thought, right? He's also a part of the Enlightenment, of the European Enlightenment. He was, I think, Scottish or English. All these people, they developed this idea of freedom where you shouldn't be coerced into doing anything. You shouldn't, if the government doesn't have the right to come and take your private property, the government shouldn't tell you what job to do. The king, the guy in your village, the chief in your village, they should not be telling you what to do. You should have the right to do what you want. The freedom to do what you want, to pursue happiness the way you want to, right? That is the first 100 years of classical liberalism. That's classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is, yes, if you want to do business, you should be able to do business. You don't need to ask someone for a license to do this business. You should be able to do it. In the next 50 to 100 years, classical liberalism evolved, where you went from this thing called negative rights, negative freedoms, negative liberty, which is the freedom from. So I'm free from your coercion. I'm free from your orders. But the next wave of philosophers like Thomas Hill Green and even John Stuart Mill, he evolved. He was like a good bridge between the two. They evolved into something called positive rights, whereas it's the freedom to. Now, if I want to get a job, what do I need? Skills. How do I obtain skills? Through an education. Where does an education come from? Like, no one is going to educate me for free. So then how do I pay for that education? Right? So this is where Thomas Hill Green, for example, his book was called Political Ethics, something like Political Ethics or Ethics. And he basically talked about how in order to have true liberalism, in order to emancipate yourself, you have to do a certain amount of reading. You have to have a certain amount of education. You have to have an understanding of rational thought, of how to apply logic to a certain circumstance. So that's when these ideas, so if someone is under threat of extortion from somebody, and you get rid of the guy who's extorting him, that guy is now free. But then he doesn't have any other skills to do anything else. So is he really free? So that's where this shift from That's where the social liberalism comes from. That's why we talk about welfare states. That's why we talk about free healthcare. Because we now understand that if people aren't sick, they can't work. It's not a moral argument on its own. It's also an economic argument. It's an argument that if you're not educated, you're not going to have skills. You're not going to be a benefit to society. So this is where I'm a classical liberal, but a classical liberal of the T.H. Green
Right.
Tradition. So I believe that for humans to be emancipated, you need to have a certain level of education. You should not, for example, I'm an atheist, so I've always been, since I was brought up in a very Buddhist-like background, but I've never, for example, Buddhism, the philosophical part is fine. In Christianity, the stories of archetypes and the biblical narratives, they're interesting. But this is not, for example, how modern society is not planned based on Buddhism or Christianity, right? It's based on a set of rules.
Yeah. Sure.
And that's where this social contract thing. So the other thing Sajith Premadasa mentioned, one was the New Deal. And the New Deal comes from this tradition of classical liberalism where FDR said we need, for example, he put limits on the 2008 financial crisis happened because in 1996 under Bill Clinton, they repealed an act that FDR brought in. It was called the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act was removed in 1996, and it basically, there was a firewall for banks where if you're going to do investments, you have to have a separate pool of money. You can't use this pool, which is your savings base, for investments. So that was a firewall. Bill Clinton came in the 1990s and destroyed the firewall. So then the financial sector was deregulated and they were able to do anything they wanted, any kind of products, and slowly this evolved into what we ended up in 2008 was the total financial
If I'm not
crisis.
mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but that kind of like distorted the valuations of most of these companies, right? Once they removed the police last year.
So the financial sector itself it just exploded. Right. So the valuations and when the financial sector explodes, what happens? You get a lot of money going all over the place, right? So then when companies are getting more money, their value increases anyway.
But that's not linked, that's not grounded in the real economy though, is it?
I mean, so shall I sidetrack quickly?
Yeah, please.
This is, so economics, right? I said we talk about economics, so this is something I think a lot of people don't quite appreciate. You are familiar with 2008, right?
Yes.
So what happened was basically a personal debt crisis linked to mortgages, right? This was the collapse of the financial systems in the West. And when I say financial system in the West, I'm talking about Washington, D.C., New York, Geneva, Zurich, Paris, London, Amsterdam. These are the financial capitals in history, right? So so you are talking about central banks, finance ministries, independent think tanks, independent researchers, economists, all these people studying the economy. And you're telling me nobody noticed that personal debt was at record levels? Nobody noticed that mortgages were overvalued, that properties were overvalued? Nobody noticed? No, they did notice. They all noticed. But what happened? They didn't think it was a problem. They did not think that you and I being in personal debt, taking a mortgage, taking a second mortgage, and carrying 2 times our value in debt was a problem. Why? Because in economics, neoclassical economics says that debt is just a function of savings. Your debt is my savings. Because the bank is just taking my savings and lending it to you.
Yeah.
So personal debt is not a problem. That's what happened. That's a yes, the products were a problem, the deregulation was a problem, yes. But the primary problem was that nobody noticed that everyone's in debt because they didn't care. They're like, oh, everyone's in debt, but that means there's a lot of savers out there. So it doesn't really matter.
But Kusum, that money is not real though. That money is not real, so it's not a saving.
So this is what I'm saying. So explain to me, how did economics get this wrong? That's why. Because, for example, what people think about banks. So this is a banking system issue. There's 2 kind of models that are popular to explain banking at the micro and macro level. One is called, loanable funds model. So the loanable funds model suggests that a bank has X amount of reserves, X amount of savings, right? So they take a small portion of that savings and they lend it out at an interest rate, and this is the banking system. Completely wrong, okay? There's another thing called the fractional reserve model. fractional reserve model says you have X amount in reserves, X amount in savings, and at any given day you have to keep this much as your capital adequacy ratio, and then you lend this much out. That's your fractional reserve banking. That's how money is created. That's how the economy, that's how credit is created. Also wrong. Also, actually, it explains one part of banking, but not the full part of banking.
Okay. Why is that wrong? Yeah, please.
Okay, so what happens is there's actually nothing to say that there needs to be savings for there to be loans. Savings do not determine loans. Loans create deposits.
Okay.
So if a bank gives out a loan, what happens on its balance sheet? Its assets go up, because if a bank gives me a loan, that's a repayment someday to the bank. So that's an asset to the bank.
With interest, right?
With interest. But even the loan itself, it's an asset because that money has to come back to me. So that's a claim. That's a future claim on my cash flows.
Sure.
That's an asset to the bank. So the asset side of the balance sheet goes up. What happens to the liabilities? The liabilities also goes up, but that doesn't happen in accounting in any other kind of institution. Only in a bank, because the bank has to credit that fund to my account. And I'll have an account at the bank. And then I'll get that credit, right? That's endogenous money creation. That is the credit creation model.
Right.
So technically speaking, a bank doesn't need to have a single rupee of savings. If they have adequate reserves, if they satisfy the capital adequacy ratio, they're free to lend.
Right.
Lend.
As much as
It's
you
not like the savings rate has an impact on credit growth. That's not the thing. But in 2006, 2007, 2008, all economists thought, personal debt's up, covered by mortgages. Okay, some of them have over leverage on the mortgage, the valuation will eventually go up. That's not a big deal. That's literally what they thought. And that's a core thing in economics. It's a pretty core part of economics. And how did that work out, right? So this is the thing. That's why I talk about economics like what people think is economics is not. Like if people think like if you just liberalize, if you just get the government out of the way, and they'll bring up Singapore.
Yeah.
Again, I'll bring up Singapore. Singapore, if you want to be like Singapore, be like Singapore. 90% of the land is owned by the Singapore government. During its growth phase, 30% of GDP was SOEs, state-owned enterprises. Even today, SOEs account for about 20% of GDP, right? It's one of the most intrusive governments in the world. In the world, right? But it's a free market economy as well.
Yeah.
So that's why this dichotomy between socialism, free markets, libertarianism is not real. Like there are some things that have worked. There are certain rules of the game, and you just apply them and see what happens. What we're doing is something that's never happened. There's never been a country that grew, developed with a small government, a low spend. Like as countries develop, the government spends more relative to GDP. Like tax to GDP increases as so. If you look at the OECD countries or the G7 countries, their tax to GDP is in 25-30%. Their government spending is 40% or something of GDP. Like, not like ours. So in Sri Lanka, we had this idea that if we just get the government out of the way, if we just privatize all our SOEs, everything's going to be fine. But ask yourselves, what are the main SOEs in Sri Lanka that loses money? Sri Lankan Airlines. Okay, I'm fully for privatizing Sri Lankan Airlines. Why hasn't it happened? They say no buyers. Why is there no buyer? Because every single government in Sri Lanka has offered a maximum of 50% of shares.
Right.
The previous government, Ranil Wickremesinghe's government, said in order to find an investor, the Treasury has to write off $500 million of People Bank's loans from Sri Lankan Airlines. So that's us, that's you and me, right? That's our kids. That's the taxpayer is writing off $500 million of Sri Lankan Airlines debt. Cabinet memorandum. Okay, but it will sell it now in the future. So then it's off the book. So that's a plus. We didn't sell it. No one's going to buy an indebted airline, even if you cancel out $500 million, there's still a couple of $1 billion left.
Right.
And you're only giving them 50%. If you give them controlling stake 75, 80, 90%, there might be a buyer.
Right.
Okay, that's one SOE. That's Sri Lankan Airlines. What are the other SOEs? Ceylon Electricity Board, CEB. Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, CPC. This is fuel and utilities, guys.
Yeah.
It's never been successfully privatized anywhere in the world. Where they did in the UK, now they're talking about nationalizing them again. The water, they privatized water in the UK. It's been a disaster. Anyone who's lived in the UK will tell you, we really shouldn't have privatized water. Like, it's a stupid idea. So Sri Lanka is not going to get out of this by private. We can privatize every SOE tomorrow.
Right.
That doesn't do anything for our future prospects. That means we'll save more money, but if we spend that money on, I don't know, some kind of random subsidy to some random investor somewhere, that money's wasted. So this is not like, what you do, like there's a couple of economists that have made this point that this is the time. Last year, this year, and the next 3 years, when Sri Lanka has savings from not paying our debts, because we're on a moratorium, we have a lot of fiscal space. So this is what was said in Parliament, even during the two other governments, we have plenty of money. One of our MPs said the treasury is overflowing with money. Does that sound serious to you?
Yeah.
Can a country that's not paying its debt, that has a debt to GDP of 100%, can it be overflowing with money? Like, just think about it, like, rationally, right? So this is where we are at. Like, this, I'm not some guy that knows every goddamn thing here, okay? But I'm just telling you what these guys are doing. It's not making any sense to me. And when I bring this up to people, I'm not hearing good arguments. Like, I love hearing a good argument against my point of view, but I'm not hearing good arguments.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just not.
No, I completely get it. And it's kind of strange because it's so hard to understand. And I do geopolitical analysis. So in my mind, as you had pointed out, we do things in our interest. Countries do things in our interest. And I think our leadership does nothing in the state's interest.
They don't even understand the state's interest, right? What is this? So tourism is a state interest, okay? Is this the optimal tourism strategy that we have? We have Russians taking over parts of Unawatuna, Israelis taking over parts of Arugambe and Ahangama, and they have opened up businesses and they are running their own money. We can't calculate how much money we make from tourism. We don't in Sri Lanka. I have friends who have tourism companies in Colombo, regulated to the hilt. Like, they can't put a toilet seat here, they have to get approval. Down south, you can do anything you want, anywhere you want. Now, again, it's not easy, right? So they went to remove these temporary businesses along the beach. They destroyed some of those shacks. Now, I can't tell you if it's good or bad. No, I don't know. What I know is that this is not regulated. What I know is that guy put up a shed. He knows someone in the locality who said, okay, you put it here much, I won't do anything. The police also let it go for over 20 years. And now you're coming and removing his shed.
Yeah, it's terrible.
So it's a bad look for everybody. And then the foreigners see this and they're like, oh, you're oppressing these people. And then someone puts an article saying we don't like Israelis. And the Israeli guys like, what the hell? So this is not like this is, then the Ukrainian and the Russians have an issue in Unawatra, they have a fight.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, like, even the tourism thing, like, what are we doing? Like, we don't have high value tourists. So we've increased the number, but the value, whatever we're calculating, is now less than it was before. So someone has to explain to me what the strategy is. Like, the only strategy that we have that will remain consistent is remittances. Is that people will keep going abroad
and sending remittances. Do you think that kind of distorts like the IMF program because we're getting so much remittances that the IMF, it's like, oh wow, guys, look at our foreign, but it's all from our brain drain.
And people will say, oh no, it's unskilled workers going abroad. I'm like, yeah, but you need people to do unskilled workers. What did we learn during COVID?
Yeah.
We learned during COVID that essential work is not just your doctor and your nurse, right?
Yeah.
It's the guy who collects the garbage. It's the guy who cleans the drain. It's the guy who sweeps the street. Without those things, that's also essential work. Like caring for a baby, a nanny, right? Caring for an elder. That is essential work. And that stuff, not only does it not get captured in GDP, like there's no payment for a babysitter that's in GDP, right? Someone, your mother-in-law looks after your kid.
Yeah.
They're not getting paid for that, right? I hope not. But at the end of the day, that's work. It's not getting, actually this prime minister, because she has some kind of a feminist background, she understands that side of it at least. But overall in our economy, there's no productivity. And that's also not a function of our people. Like, people say, yeah, we are not a industrious, society. Sri Lankan people are hardworking. We have an entitlement culture. I'm like, okay, entitlement culture. Show me the data point. What is the data point are we spending more on welfare than any other country in the world? No. We are one of the lowest spenders on welfare relative to GDP amongst our peer group. Do we spend more on social assistance? No. Very low spending on social assistance. Do we have a huge government? Yes. The number of people is very high. Yeah. The World Bank told us too many people in the public sector. But they also said, you're not spending enough for public sector salaries. Right? So we're not spending enough for public sector salaries, but we have too many people in our public sector. What does that mean? We're just hiring people, giving them a tuppence of a salary, and say, you have a job now. And that counts to employment. So
Well, actually, one of our the previous guest on the podcast, he had actually told us, he was the governor of the central province, and he had told us that that's pretty much what Ranil did, was to say, here, more jobs, because it's my job as president to create jobs. So I've expanded the public sector, and it's just...
and this government came in and they've given multiple salary hikes to the government sector, which is fine, give people a living wage, but then also like have a rationalization of the people. Like, why do you have 10 people in this government office that has 3 computers and just a bunch of files? Like, what are these people doing here? So that they didn't do, because that's politically costly.
Yes.
Right? But giving them salary increment is an easy win. Everyone's like, even I can't argue against it, because obviously you have to pay people a decent wage, otherwise what's the point? But then the productivity side is completely ignored. So when the euro crisis happened in Europe, Greece started collapsing. The thing in England was that Greek people are lazy.
Right.
Right? That's what they said. The Greek people are lazy. That's why the economy is not doing well. When they checked, the Greek people were working more man hours than most of Europe. So it's not about being lazy, it's about being productive. And productivity is a factor of your training, your technology, your skills, how it's developed. So if we keep saying Sri Lankans are lazy, entitled, they're not doing it, like 3-wheelers. I know you all use 3-wheelers, I use 3-wheelers. They're great, right? Some would say, you get to drive a 3-wheeler. That's the free market. You should be able to do what you want to drive a 3-wheeler. In economics, a 3-wheeler that kind of work is what's called low-income cash informal work. That's a productivity trap. Right? So this is a thing. Gig work is not automatically about economic freedom. It's economic freedom if you have a bit of spare time, you need a little bit extra money for something else. Yeah, I'm going to work at McDonald's in the States, or here it's like do Uber Eats or do an Uber or something like that, right? But if that is your main job, if your main job is being a fast food like clerk or a Uber rider, that's a problem. That's a low productivity trap that you've fallen into. And that's a function of there not being other jobs. Why are public sector jobs popular in Sri Lanka? Why do people in villages like you and I, just normal Sri Lankans, why do they want to work for the public sector? No prospect of higher salary, right? No, like you're never going to move from where you live. You will travel far for this job. But the day you stop working, you get a pension. And that will allow you to survive. And they will, because of a certain mindset, they go to the private sector. They may make 3 years of good salary, but then if something happens, they know they're not covered. They have then depend on EPF, ETF. So these are incentives. So you're incentivizing people into certain choices. So unless you recognize those incentives, you're just going to let people keep following those same things. So 3-wheelers is a problem. Like, it's a vote. It's a big vote. It's like 6 lakhs, 7 lakhs 3-wheelers. It's a lot of votes.
You can't.
So you can't just get rid of them, but then you regulate them. The 3-wheeler association says something, right? So, but you have to regulate them, right? You can't be giving a service to the public on the road, and you don't have a signal light. You do whatever you want on the road. You're not numbered.
I guess that's why they're quite quiet about the whole pick me Uber and like the mafia. I was down south last week and I ordered an Uber. And he's like,
why did you do that?
Well, it was late.
Get that uncle just seated there near wherever you're saying usually, right?
Well, I did.
So what happened? Did they pull a scene? No?
Well, no, he's like, are mafia ticket, the.
He's like, I don't know.
What mafia? I'm not from the mafia. He's like, nah, I was like looking. I was like, yeah, there's like 2 3-wheel guys, but they're a bit far. He's like, okay, I'll come. But can you walk a kilometer down? I'll come. So I was like, sure. Comes, picks me up. He's like, get it. I'm like, I don't know what's happening, but it's ridiculous. And the tourists, they also want to take pick-me's and Ubers because they also know that they are being absolutely ripped off.
It's easy, right? You don't have to carry cash.
You don't have to carry cash, exactly, all of those things.
You don't get screwed, you know the rate, like you don't have to depend on negotiating with the guy for the rate. None of that is there.
But it's crazy. It was like a war zone down south. So actually, just to quickly go back to the whole Sajith thing, where do you see this going? Where do you see
honestly,
the party in 2029?
I understand that it's going to be very difficult for Mr. Premadasa to win a presidential election against AKD as things stand now. But I don't think things are going to stand now like this for a while, because as I said, in 2028, 2029, when we start full repayments, by that point, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is supposed to build our foreign exchange reserves to about $14 billion. We currently have about 5 to 6. So what does that mean? So Yahapal did this thing where they borrowed ISBs and they put it in the reserves. So when Gotabaya took power, we had $7 billion in reserves. That was the highest, that was the peak of Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserve. We've never gone above that, right? That was borrowed money. We borrowed from the ISBs, put it in. At the time, I was like, honestly, Mashang, I don't know how to explain this to you. I was like, this is a good idea compared to what they would do otherwise.
Right.
What they would do otherwise is put it into the treasury and waste the hell out of it because there were no productive programs, there were no investments that we were quoting. We give targeted subsidies. They were giving subsidies to everybody. Everyone was subsidized. People who didn't need it, people who needed it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, in a sense, we have a buffer. And the central bank governor at the time, Kumaraswamy, said we could see headwinds coming. They could see the global economic slowdown. There was COVID happening. So it made a certain amount of sense. Okay, fine. But now, with the new Central Bank Act and with the IMF, you can't borrow and put money into reserves. So you have to buy dollars from the market.
Okay.
And there's a limited number of dollars in the Sri Lankan market because whatever coming from tourism, remittances, that's what the central bank has to buy. So the central bank will keep absorbing dollars. Now they have to aggressively build reserves.
Where are they absorbing dollars from? From capital markets?
From the market. So they'll go to the banks and the banks have dollars at the end of the day.
Locally,
right. Yeah. So they'll absorb as many dollars as they need to on a given week, given month, and they'll build these reserves. As you absorb dollars from the market, the rupee is under pressure. There's less dollars for commercial operations, less dollars for importers. So then the rupee starts depreciating, right? As the rupee depreciates, you have a higher cost of living because we're net importers. So little by little, there'll be a squeeze just from the currency depreciation. Forget about the natural increase in costs. So by 2027, 2028, 2029, I don't think AKD will have to pull something out of his hat, right? He'll have to give some kind of a massive giveaway to people, or he'll have to do something to get people on side, because if there are material conditions, like Yapalnia said, for 3-4 years, we achieved the first 2 consecutive primary account surpluses in the country's history. We balanced the books. We have increased tax to GDP by 1.5%. That's all they managed. Mind you, this is one of the main projects. They launched the 2018 Inland Revenue Act, and they literally went from 10% to 11.2%. That's the maximum we increased from, right? And then Gotabaya took it down to 8. So Yahapalne was also saying, oh, we have done all these amazing things. The economy is in really but they came into power. Mahinda Rajapaksa, being a victorious war president, lost an election to Maithripala. Maithripala, like the least charismatic, like who the hell is he? We don't know this person. Where is he from? Polonnaruwa. But he beat Mahinda Rajapaksa. Why? Because people were struggling. Because 2009 the war ended, 2010 euphoria, 2011 highway has opened up, 2012 everything's going great, Mahinda's going to win again. And then people realize nothing's changed for me. Like nothing has changed. If there's a rain, my harvest goes, I'm in debt again.
Yeah.
Like if I don't have my job, my salary's not worth as much, the inflation's up. That's why Ranil won. That's why Maithripala won. But in the next 4 years, people's material conditions worsened. Like it just got, because we went to an IMF program, another poorly designed
austerity.
IMF austerity program. Austerity, even the IMF, the Georgieva, she came, is her name Georgieva or something?
Yes.
Yeah, she came to Sri Lanka recently, right?
Yes.
And she was saying to one of my former schoolmates, actually, in an interview, she said, we are not the IMF of your grandmother's generation, right? And she's right, because the IMF of that generation was all about austerity, hardcore austerity, cut spending. That's not what they did to Sri Lanka in 2016. Revenue-based fiscal council. Revenue-based means raise tax revenue. That's where you're losing out. They know, because they can see the data. Sri Lanka is not spending more than any other country. We are a moderate spender because of debt interest. If you take out debt interest, we're a low spender. We are a historically low spend on health and education. Historically low spend on social assistance, according to the peer group. So they knew all this. But Yahapalne just spent 3-4 years doing nothing. No major productive investments, no major FDI. What was happening? And then the Easter attack. So this is the thing, though. Unless AKD and them understand your left progressive government, you're a Marxist-Leninist party, you were voted in by people, by farmers, they sell PP base, most of them voted for them. These guys need something in their lives. And right now they're like, we want ape andu, right? Right now they're like ape andu. Wait and see another year down the line.
But surely they also see the writing on the wall when they were, let's say, the
You would
scenario
think, right?
plan.
But didn't Radil see the writing on the wall? Did Gotthard see the writing on the wall? That's
Well-
the thing, man. Power does weird things to you.
Well, that's the thing, right? I was hoping you can shed some light on the psychology of this. What is the psychology where they are acting against their own interest almost?
Do you feel that way though? I mean, how do you? Can I just ask? How do you guys judge this new government? Like, how do you guys judge them on a personal point of view? Just tell me what you think. Like, what do you think they've done right? What do you think they've done wrong? Just roughly.
From a purely material, strategic point of view, I really struggle to understand what they have done or are doing. But from a narrative, social fabric point of view, I understand the importance of their current stay because they have, kind of toned down the temperature and people feel like there is something. But this is all very short term, and if there is nothing to back that up, it's all going to collapse again. And that's my take. And from foreign policy to economics to creating programs, I don't see anything being done. And
What
I don't
do you
know,
think,
maybe I'm
Masai? What
skeptical.
about you? How do you feel skeptical? Do you feel hopeful? Do you think that they deserve
Well,
more time?
I'm glad that, obviously, from an integrity point of view, none of the promises that were made have been kept. But I'm glad, for example, the IMF thing, for example, they said they wanted to kind of get rid of the IMF, but I'm glad they stuck with it, right? So I don't know how to feel upon it because I'm banging on the fact that they
So you're happy with them because they didn't
No, I'm
do
not
what they
happy
said
with
they would do?
them. I'm glad they didn't.
You're glad they didn't divert from the IMF course. So
Yes,
this is fair.
yes.
This is something I wanted to ask you about. So this is the problem that we have, is that we've been sold the idea that if you again, you can stick. This is the point I was trying to make. The IMF is only telling us that we need to make this primary account surplus. Okay, how we make a primary account surplus is completely up to us.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to agree to a tax to GDP of 15%. We could have got a tax to GDP of 17%, which creates more fiscal space. We didn't have to agree to, for example, what do you call it? They have GFN target as well, gross financing needs target.
Okay.
That gross financing needs target comes from the level of debt that we already had. Because we're already carrying debt as well as future debt. So that's where the debt restructuring comes in. We didn't fight for a reduction in debt stock. So then our GFNs obviously is going to be a difficult meet because we are still meeting these debt repayments, right? GFNs will be manageable for the next 12 years, because of this restructuring. Then what happens? Then our GFNs are back beyond the sustainable amount. So you can keep everything the same. You don't have to have a single meeting with the IMF. You don't. But you have to find a way to raise tax revenue, number one. Because if you don't raise taxing, you don't have money to invest in anything. Forget schools, forget education. Let's say we can't bother, we can't. Health, private hospitals, use it. Too bad, right? But we're going to spend all the money we can to get semiconductor, or not semiconductor, but let's say some electronic manufacturing company, something high value. And what do you have to spend on when they come? Give them land. If they have to build infrastructure to connect to a port, connect to an industrial zone. If you need subsidized electricity rates, big money you have to spend on that. Spend on that. That's a productive investment. But you're not just giving a subsidy. You're saying, from this subsidy in the next 4 or 5 years, these are your benchmarks. This is what you have to do. So that's industrial policy. That's the kind of thing that if you don't do that now, like, you're not going to get anywhere. So the question about AKD and SP, Sajith, Premadasa and the SGB also have to construct their own narrative.
Yes.
Right? They have to construct a narrative. Like, how hard is it for a political party in this context to say we should be taxing the rich? Like, why is that is that? And if I tell you guys we have to tax the rich, you'll look at me, most people would look at me like I'm some kind of communist, like I'm a leftist. Taxing the rich just means you pay a higher rate of tax if you have a higher income. That's fucking centrist. That's as moderate as it comes. That's Adam Smith. Adam Smith literally says in his Wealth of Nations book, he literally says each subject of the state should pay according to their capabilities, and those with abundance should pay a fair share more, because what he's saying is people with extra should be paying a little extra because they get more benefits back from it. So this is in the 17th damn century that they understood this shit. And we don't understand that. Like even to this day, like you watch Face the Nation or this, some of the guys come up there and say, yeah, we're just spending way too much as a government. But all the data shows that we're not spending enough. Like we are not spending enough on education. The IMF told us you have to increase spending on health, increase spending on education. That's what the IMF told us. But then our economists get on and say, we're just too much of a big spender. So, sorry, just to answer the question, I think if the SJP can build a narrative around just the truth as I see it, is that we have an extremely imbalanced economy, extreme levels of concentrations of wealth, record inequality. This is not my opinion, this is the stats, this is data, right? This is not my personal Kusum's opinion or the SJB opinion, this is the facts. In such a context, if you can't build a pro-populist, people-friendly message and point to the damn left progressive government and say, is this your left progressive government? Because they haven't done anything for you, right? But what are we doing right now instead? When the IMF chief came down and said, this government has done amazingly well in stabilizing the country, and we're really happy that this government has, stabilized the rupee, and inflation is under control, and we're really happy. Some SJB MPs said, how can she say that it was the last government who made this country stable? It was the last government who did it. Why? Because they are more inclined to support that UNP. They want to just, the right answer is, the previous government didn't bring stability. The current government isn't bringing stability. We're fucked. That's the truth. But Georgia comes here and says, in a country there with 8 men, you think they don't know these stats? You think they don't know what I know about the real economy? They know, but they're doing a marketing role.
Yeah.
It's marketing. It is, right? Yeah. So that's why people look at the IMF like they're this strict, apolitical, non-biased, look at how much they gave Ukraine.
Yeah.
A country that was destroyed, completely, go and check, the Ukrainian government is completely dependent on the US taxpayer.
100%.
100%. You know this, right? Yeah. But they got something like $200 or $100 billion some IMF facility. Yeah. You're telling me there's no political lending going on?
I mean, the IMF is just a geopolitical instrument for the US.
I mean, yeah, so look, I don't need to go that far to say this. Like, so there are people, NPP MPs, like who's the Deputy Minister of Industries? The younger guy who worked at one of the government companies. I can't remember, I'm blanking on his name, I've met him, he's a really nice guy. But he, on a FB Live during the election campaign, he said, in Sinhala, he was saying this. They are just colonialists, they are neo-colonialists, these IMF people, they're coming to suck us dry and all that. You don't need to go that far. Like, you don't have to, make them
the villain.
Just do your part to mitigate the worst aspects of the program. Yeah. Yeah. But it's all rhetorical. So even some of the economists that I respect the most, they do make these rhetorical flourishes against the IMF, and I'm like, so no point blaming the IMF, man. They're just doing what they always do. You have to be smarter because you have 30, 40, 50 years of IMF programs that you can learn from, that you should have learned from. So
yeah, and I don't feel the IMF is anyway inclined to make us want to grow. If anything, if I were in the IMF, I would want to just be like, see you again in a few years so I can come.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, the IMF is not even like that. The IMF just wants to see,
why not?
They want to see our GDP number go up so that our debt sustainability improves, and they say they did their job. That's all it is. Their job is to make sure that every country that's in debt, because we are not, if every country was in debt to themselves, in the sense that if the central bank keeps buying, so Japan is able to do 200% tax to GDP, debt to GDP, because most of the debt is to themselves. So their central bank just buys up their finance ministry's bonds. That's all they do, right? But most countries don't survive like that. So a lot of countries need external borrowings, right? They need foreign currency borrowing. So because of the yen, Japan has some cushioning, right? And because they have a very big high-tech export market, they can afford that kind of thing. Sri Lanka cannot, right? So we need to borrow from some dude in the Cayman Islands or some fund somewhere. We need to go to them and say, can you give us $2 million, $10 million, buy these bonds? So that means there has to be an organization somewhere in the world that when shit hits the fan, they can come and moderate these contracts between the private bondholders and the national governments. That's the IMF. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's what that's the furniture. That's the architecture.
Sure.
Do it. But don't be like, oh man, if we do this, we're gonna grow and our people are gonna be happy and it's gonna be milk and honey if we reach these intended targets. I mean, it's bullshit. Everyone should be honest about it. Like, We can meet every single target of the IMF and we
be
could
in the same place.
Like, so when I say we may need a new debt restructuring in 2029, 2030, the central bank governor, not that he's responded to me, but he says, oh, the people who said we need a debt restructuring, they're totally wrong. That's totally wrong. And I'm like, yeah, okay, you cannot restructure your debt. Sure. But then on the other side, you have another trade-off because you will keep absorbing dollars and keep paying debt and keep using government revenue to pay debt. That means there's be no, the underinvestment will just continue. So again, like, it's a trade-off, right? There's no right and wrong, but the central bank governor is also, in a way, like, again, I have huge respect for the guy, right? But no one can tell me that it's okay, that it's completely appropriate for a guy to get an IMF. He was working for the IMF, for example. He was in the central bank, he retired. He was hired by the IMF, he was working for the IMF. He retired from the IMF, gets an IMF pension, gets appointed to Sri Lanka Central Bank in the face of a crisis. So he's receiving a pension from the IMF, working for the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, negotiating with the IMF on behalf of the government. Like, you're not telling me that this is right. And then take, for example, the debt restructuring. The central bank governor signs on behalf of the contract for the finance ministry. He signs on behalf of the central bank. He signs in some other capacity also he was signing.
How can he sign on behalf of the finance ministry?
He was part of the monetary board. And in the monetary board, I think there was something where he has to sign as some representative of the central bank into this contract. So maybe I'm wrong about that, but essentially, you don't have someone who's receiving a pension from one party negotiating against that party with another. And that's the thing, it is a negotiation, right? People think we are powerless, but the fact is, those people want to get paid.
Yes.
Those bondholders, they want to get paid. So you can't say, as a bank, I understand this, that if a company is completely bankrupt, they're coming to me with a restructuring, the bank has a lot to fucking lose. Like, we have a lot. That's why it's in our interest to get this guy back to a position where he can pay us back our interest and part of our capital at least. So that's a negotiation. And I've dealt with this where just because a guy is not paying us, we can't treat him like shit when he comes to the bank. If we get him the tea, get him the pastries, my boss will come down, maybe he'll go and meet the CEO quickly and I don't mind these things, we'll sort it out. That this is part of the game. But it seems, so my biggest problem another big problem with Ranil Wickremesinghe is they did all this for political expediency. For example, the debt restructuring, they did in record time. Why? Because to meet the election. If you remember, on the 2 days before the election, they had this nationally televised thing where we signed bilateral debt restructuring agreement with China, with the US. You remember they filmed with each official. This was all political. And even the revenue, the 15% tax to GDP revenue target, it's an easy target to achieve. You don't have to put a lot of pain on the people that matter. You can put most of the pain on the average person and reach this 15%. You don't really have to trouble those people that made, 5-10 billion rupees just in the span of a few, because think about it. When you do a debt restructuring, you receive less interest, right? Because I've said, okay, you can't afford to pay me, I'll take a little less interest from you. Who didn't do that? The banking sector, the institutional investors in our bonds, because they were not part of the domestic debt restructuring.
Only the pension part of the domestic.
Only the pension funds took a hit. But why? The excuse they gave was that if we restructure the debt of the banking sector, that it'll create a banking crisis. It'll create a instability in the banking sector, right? And that's not. I mean, I'm telling you, you can look at any bank's balance sheet, take a look at their accumulated profits. You are looking at 50, 100, 200 billion rupees worth of accumulated profits. There was no system-wide danger to the banks. The banks were saying, no, we will have a lot of impairments in the coming years when the economy is struggling. Our NPs will go up. NPs have gone up. Banks are extremely well regulated. NPs have gone up. The non-performing loans have gone up from about 8% industry-wide to about 12% industry-wide. It's not nothing, but banks know how to handle these things. That's what they do, risk mitigation. So they played a good game, and if I was in the banking sector, I would do the exact same thing. Why would you take it when you know you can outcompete these guys? When you know you can out-negotiate your own central bank and your own finance ministry, why would you not do it? That's why you have economists in the finance ministry and the central bank negotiating a debt restructuring. Why? A finance professional should be negotiating a debt restructuring, not an economist. That's the problem. So our whole lives we've had economists dealing with finance. And I'm just telling you the results. I don't have to tell you the results.
Yeah.
You've seen the results, right? So.
Well, okay. Well, on that note, I think we can end soon as well. Anything
No
to
problem.
add? So, actually, just want to like quickly get into maybe your personal grand philosophy. What
Okay.
is your personal grand philosophy?
I mean, like I said, I'm a classical liberal. I believe in, I mean, say something very banal and say I believe in human development and human emancipation. That's why I call myself liberal. I really think that I really like, again, I'll go back to Adam Smith because I just noticed that a lot of, especially people on the center right, they're very pro Adam Smith. And I realized that a lot of them just haven't really read Adam Smith. Like Adam Smith has two very famous books. Everyone quotes from The Wealth of Nations, but he had another one called Moral Sentiments, which came before. So the name itself tells you moral sentiments, where he's talking about how societies are built. It's about caring for the person down the road, understanding that society is better if that person down the road is slightly better off than he was yesterday, right? So he uses this, for example, he uses this example of a pin to explain how important it is to have specialized labor. You know, so modern factories, you don't have one person making an item. You have people in a row that do one thing for each product. You put a screw here and you pass it on. The other person puts a chip here. The other person comes. So now it's machines. But back in the day, he was like, if you have one person manufacturing a pin, you would have X number of pins at the end of the day. If you have 10 people manufacturing one specific part of that pin, you will 10 times your output.
Right.
You will 10 times your productivity, right? So that's why he said specialization of labor is extremely important to productivity.
And quality, I see.
And quality and all these things, right? It creates, productivity means you are creating more for less. And that's a surplus. That's good for the economy. The surplus goes down to people, right? What does he say later on? Same book, Wealth of Nations, about specialization. He said, though the specialization of labor creates productivity, it also dulls the human mind. It makes a human being as ignorant a creature as you could possibly, because you're not expanding your horizons. You're just doing the same thing every single day. And this takes something away from you. And this is Adam Smith in the 17th century applying it to a pin factory. But I worked in a corporate for 10 years, and I can tell you that there is something of that. There is something of that where I'm sitting at my cubicle, I'm doing the same thing every day. And I mean, I would never trade my banking career because I loved it for the first 5-6 years. The amount I learned, looking back, I didn't love it at the time, I'll be honest. But looking back, I'm like, that was a very privileged position to be in. Like, to be in that department, to meet those people, to have the bosses I had, to meet the companies that I met, the industrialists that I met, the cocktails, all that stuff. And honestly, it was great. I won't say anything. But there is some part of you that looks outside your window at 4:30, right? The sun's out. It's a beautiful freaking day. But you know you're going to be at this desk for another 2 hours, right? And you know when you finish at 6:30, you're going to go gym or, you know, whatever, meeting or whatever, right? And that does take something away from your life, right? And I just think that our parents' generation, right? So this is one of the things that really, like, it takes a little bit out of me when I talk about this. But like my parents, my parents are both passed away, but they're much older, so I'm quite young in my family. My father was born in 1939, colonial era, right? He was born under. So my mother was, 10 years old, younger. I think, unless you can see Sri Lanka through their eyes, you won't ever really comprehend how far we've fallen, because they saw the potential that Sri Lanka had. Like, they're the ones who were living in the country that Singapore was trying to model itself after, right? They're the ones who were like and Sri Lanka was unique among the colonies. We were one of the few colonies that had a universal healthcare system, one of the few colonies that had a very strong social assistance program in the pre-independence era. We had one of the first countrywide education systems, which was part missionary and part, then the state started taking over some of the missionaries. So that's why we had this head start. That's why there's the stories of Lee Kuan Yew coming here and, seeing what we have done. If you read World Bank reports from the 1950s, they look at Sri Lanka and say, yes, it's a country that's underdeveloped, but they're also spending a lot of money on social welfare. The classic phrase was something like, Sri Lanka is a country that's enjoyed the fruits of success before it's reached
All right.
the success or something like that. So that was in the 50s. Go 20 years down the line and read the World Bank's reports again. Now they're like shit. Sri Lanka is closer to some Scandinavian countries in their physical quality of life index. Sri Lanka has child mortality rates that compare to first world countries more than its peer group, right? That's something. That's not nothing.
Yeah, that's a
Like
big
that is the whole basis for the next 30 years of development. That's what sets you up. That's why we have people at NASA and Caltech, and because those people, like real, even the politicians, like I said, Sri Lankan politicians from back in the day, they were so well educated that you could walk into any room in any colony, in any Western society, anywhere, and people would be like, shit, they speak better English than us, they're smarter than us. It's just like, no, who are these people, right? So my parents' generation, they sacrificed something to see their country go somewhere, right? And in these last 5 to 6 years, or even you can take it back 10 years, 15 years, like I can, from speaking to my dad alone, you can just, the promise just evaporated. Like you just see this is not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. Fast, it's not going anywhere. Slow, it's not going anywhere. And it's really like, we talk about fighting for the future. We should really be fighting at least to preserve the past, like at least to fight for what we have right now. We've got a hell of a fight on our hands, a hell of a fight. And it's a real shame because your grandparents, my parents, those generations, like they sacrificed so that we could have better, you know. But we don't have better. Like we're not going to be able to afford a house. We're not going to be able to have financial freedom anytime in the future. You know, we're not going to have a debt-free life. We're going to be dependent on credit cards. Our kids are not going to when, like, I was lucky enough that the exchange rate was such, my parents had enough money to send me to England for uni. Nowadays, the parents with money, you're not even sending them to England, you're sending them to Aussie. Because England is like, you're just like, why, there's just no point sending someone to England. Luckily, Australian universities have caught up, and they're pretty good, and they're not pretty highly ranked, so we're not taking too much of a hit. But that's how far we, so if Australia didn't exist as an education market, where would our kids go to uni? Like, for foreign education? No, then they'll come to local degree programs, and are those well regulated? Do you think every local degree program offers good value?
Well,
no.
You can't even get into those, really.
And this is the other thing, right? If you don't have enough public university spaces, what are kids supposed to do, right? Then they're going to have to go to a private institute. Most, we know, at least 8 million people are poor. So if 1 year is 3.5 lakhs or 5 lakhs, dude, I swear, even Colombo Uni is about 2.5 lakhs for a master's now. So I don't know how much a private degree program is now. It might be like 5-6 lakhs. Where are these low-income families going to get 5-6 lakhs from? They'll sell a house, they'll pawn jewelry, they'll take a loan. And how is that going to work? Like, so when the kid finishes his degree, when is he going to make that 6 lakhs back?
Yeah.
Like, how is that going to work out? If his starting salary is 80,000, 90,000, how is he going to make 6 lakhs with the custody? Yeah. It's not going to happen, right? So vehicle imports, let's say you want to buy a car, you worked 30 years for your company, now you've come to the point where you can afford a good car, you can afford 30 million bucks, what do you get? A Corolla, right? And so the Corolla in reality is worth 10 million. So you spent 20 million more than the value on taxes and stuff. That 20 million you could have spent on your child's education, a second house, an investment property, a farm somewhere, something to set you up for your retirement. No, you spent 3 times the value on your Corolla because that's something you deserve. You felt like you earned that damn car. So you're going to spend it because there's a finance option for you. You're still going to work another 10, 15 years so you can afford it. But is that the best way to go about it? It's not, right? So this is where we are right now. It's just worrying. Like we're just in this place where I don't think anyone really sees where we're going. And
it's tough.
Because we have so many rich people and we're quite insulated from the rest of the country. Like if you go down south, the tourist areas are doing really well, right? But my father's from Hikkadwa. So he's born in a place called Narigama. So if you go to the Hikkadwa main tourism stretch and you look at the shops, it says Narigama. So that's where my dad was born, right? But where he was born, the actual place, the schools are not any better. Roads are not any better. Sanitation is not any better. People still have like outhouses in some areas, right? Yeah. This is a major tourist district. So what does this mean? This means that the benefits of tourism haven't percolated onto wider society, right? Not even, let's say your quality of life is not good, but your child should be going to a better school. Like he should be having a top quality education.
Doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. It's the same school, it's the same facilities.
Yeah.
So I'm saying now the post-war dividend is now 15 years in the making. So where is the post-war dividend for the people in rural Sri Lanka? It's just not there. They're
In
going
the
abroad
Cayman Islands.
in the Cayman Islands. I mean, Sri Lankans are going abroad in record numbers 15 years after war ended. So you're telling me even when there was a war, in like
More people
more
stayed.
people stayed. Like you get what I'm saying, and this is not normal.
No, I agree. I completely agree. I mean, but I feel your frustration. But that frustration is even it's amplified
Because you're
when-
looking at the opposition, you're like, these guys are shit.
Yeah, because
Literally, I
the
get it,
only people who have an understanding of where things should go are ineffectual. I mean, I'm
And we'll
sorry,
never win.
but
Yeah,
they're
we'll never win.
ineffective.
I know, I understand that. We'll never win. Like,
So yeah.
so Ranil Wickremesinghe, I've supported him his entire career almost. When did he win? When did he win? He won 2001, 2002. That too also because they bombed the airport and collapsed our economy virtually, the LTTE. That's when he won. And then 2 years later, he got voted out. The next time he ran, he put South Fonseca because he couldn't win.
Right.
South Fonseca lost. Then he put Maithripala, and Maithripala won. And then he ran, he lost. He ran, he lost. And I'm telling you, this guy's like, as much as the SJB freaking sucks, Ranil Wickremesinghe went from 500,000 votes in Colombo to less than 10,000.
I mean, yeah,
there.
that's a unique.
And that's not normal. Like, you can't be an aristocratic background, someone who's been a prime minister five times, a former cabinet, and then you lose 490% of your vote base. That's just, and then you still continue in the same party. And then people wonder why liberal parties don't have a chance, because we are split. Two, half of them are led by, and then, I'm not saying that the SJP leadership is perfect. Lots of flaws in the 3, 4, 5 people. Nobody's perfect, right? But my point is the SJP is that these 3, 4 people, at least between them, they have an ideology, they have experience, they have expertise. And I mean, I don't agree with all of them on everything. I'm a bit of an outsider in my party itself, even with the IMF
I can
rhetoric.
imagine.
You can imagine, right?
Yeah.
But I can tell you that these 4 guys were just, I can't even tell you, like, there's just no comparison between these 4, 5 people and everybody else.
I get it.
It's just not.
I totally get it.
Maybe I'm biased,
No, I get it.
So,
I get it.
I mean, I know a lot of the intellectuals who advise the NPP. Some of them, they're not happy. They're not saying it to me, but I know they're not happy because manifesto. You say what you want about Gotabaya. The man wrote a manifesto.
And he went for it.
Implemented every single thing, even while the country is crashing. Like,
Yeah.
his family is under threat. He's like, no, I'm not. Tax cut, right? At least I'll give him that. Fair enough. AKD
Go get it.
sang this song, corruption, he waved some files around, he did all this shit for 5, 6 years, and the day he came into power, he didn't stand up to the IMF. Yeah. He didn't stand, like, I'm just like, I know you think it's a good, I'm like, okay, that's
Temporarily,
an
yeah,
argument we can
yeah,
have, right?
sure.
But from a principal point of view,
Sure,
yeah.
if I'm AKD,
Exactly, yeah.
if I'm Harini, Prime Minister Harini, Dr. Harini,
Yeah.
if I'm any of these people, I mean, I wouldn't leave Sri Lanka and not come back, man. I would go away and not come back because it's just embarrassing.
It is.
Can't
It's
spend your
embarrassing. It is
entire career
embarrassing.
calling the IMF neo-colonial. Western powers are taking advantage of India as the imperial. What's different now? Ranil Wickremesinghe could have run this government the same way. He could have done the same thing.
It's the same thing.
You don't need AKD for this. And AKD had the potential, like Mahinda. Mahinda had the potential. Mahinda could have solved the political issue, given Tamil people all the rights in the world. Who's going to say anything? Anybody going to say Mahinda Rajapaksa is not patriotic or he's anti-Sinhalese? No one's going to say that, right? No, if he gave Jaffna to Prabhakaran and said, hey, I want the peace, his supporters would be like,
whatever, I trust him, I trust him.
We want the peace, right? Because you're playing to your audience.
Yeah.
What is AKD? I don't know what he's doing. I just don't.
Yeah, it's very confusing. Very, very, very. Yeah, it's quite shocking. Quite shocking. Actually, I don't know any minister in the NPP except the one that you had spoken to, and even then I don't remember her name.
Oh, Dr. Harini?
No,
I think you had a debate with
you
her.
had a
in one of
debate with
the-
her. the
Lakmali.
NPP.
Lakmali
Yes.
Fonseca, yes. I've had 2 debates with her.
Right.
Out of 159 MPs, she's the only one I know, other than like the cabinet per se.
Yeah. And I made this point as well. I mean, it's not, name recognition shouldn't be everything, but you should have some idea of your MPs.
Well,
right?
yeah,
You should
yeah,
have some,
yeah.
like,
Of their beliefs
what
and what
do they
they
do,
want, yeah.
where did they come from, what were they doing previously.
Yeah.
And I know people criticize the old guard. I'm as critical as anybody, especially even in the SJB, there are some people who should just be
Yeah.
I mean, retire now, man. Like, kid, bring your kid. Bring your kid, fine. At least it'll be he or she will have some new idea, you know.
Sure.
Nepotism, whatever. It's just, 70-year-old people, 80-year-old people. I mean, no offense to be ageist, but I think you just have to like get fresh blood in at one way or the
100%.
other. And look, we are in a third world, developing whatever country. You have to accept some level of MPs are going to be jackasses,
Yeah.
but at least get the guys in the cabinet because there's plenty of talented people, man. Like one thing from corporate Sri Lanka is, like the number of people with brains and talent and internal drive and ethics and integrity. There's plenty of people in Sri Lanka that just don't end up in politics. There's plenty of I've met professionals that, I mean, these guys they're professional to the core.
Yeah.
Like, they're to the core, they're professional. Like, and they'll just never get the chance to be in public policy.
Yeah.
They just never get the chance, and that's a shame because the people doing public policy, the incentives are just completely wrong. Like, and they're wrong about the ideas as well. So the incentives are wrong, and they have some really bad ideas. Like they're still living in like Thatcher's UK or Reagan's America, or I'm just like, what are you guys talking about right here? Like,
And when you compare it to India, I mean, the thing is, India is a big country. They also have like some dumb politicians, but when you think of a lot of problems, right? But you think of the cabinet, like the ones you mentioned, Dr. Jaishankar, the finance. These are like competent people.
And the scary thing is, India wasn't even like this like 10 years ago. India just became like this.
It just became this.
And for all of the criticism of Modi, you've got to give him credit for this, right?
Absolutely.
Because he's brought in people who know the job and put them in the job.
Absolutely.
Like, what more can you ask for, right?
Absolutely. He's turned around quite a lot.
I mean, but again, I speak to some Indian journalists, and I mean, he's not as popular in India as we think he is, but he's popular. Right?
So just we can end.
Right.
Any advice to any,
No.
let's say 2030?
Watch the podcast. Sorry if I ranted. Sorry for my language. And vote SJB. I got to get that in there. Otherwise my boss will be like, what the hell? You ended there, you blasted us a little bit. No. But honestly, I'll still say the SJB is honestly the only party that has any idea. Whether we'll ever get a chance to make a difference, I don't know. Whether I'll be around for that, I don't know, because I mean, I've been in this for 5-6 years. I can't do this kind of thing. Too old to friggin' migrate now, but like others, I would have tried it by now, honestly. But so let's see how it goes. But you guys just keep doing what you're doing and get as many people, get as many like diverse voices out there, because one thing that independent media, YouTube and social media does is that it lets people with different ideas
100%,
get on platforms, and that's like, if you have a platform, try to get as varied as points of view as possible, because that's the only way to learn. Like, if you're exposed to different types of ideas, it's the only way we ever learn.
Absolutely.
Like, if I didn't like meet some of the people I'd met in my career, like, I'd still be thinking about a primary account surplus, and that's just not going to get us anywhere. I'd still be like, primary account surplus.
No, fair enough. You learn by doing and meeting people.
And just talking it through. The most important thing is just talk something through and try to take something to a logical conclusion and see if that's where you wanted to go, because before you get there, you should probably see where you're going.
Okay. Thank you for
coming. All right, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.